massive welcome. Before we go off, yes, the meeting will be recorded. So if you do not like your face to be recorded, feel free to turn cameras on, but we would love for you to just click got it. But welcome to Fuse 2021. I know it's been a lot of work in the past few months, and Mayan has put in a lot of efforts. So we're so glad to see it's finally kicking off, and it's kicking off in a way where we're not in the one physical space together, but we're together in some way, some form. Before we move on, I would like to officially welcome Mr. Monty Pryor to do the welcome to country. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm up here in North Queensland, and my father's people, Burigaba Nation, which goes from the other side of Ross River, going down south, Proserpine and Bowen. And my mother's people are from Cairns, near Cairns, a little place called Yarrabah and Kunganji. So on behalf of my two nations, I would like to welcome you all and think about where you are and the nations of the land that you stand upon, and take a moment in your mind to say hello to everybody past, present. And so that's all I can say is welcome from me up here, and I hope the spirits are with you all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your wise words, Mr. Monty Pryor. And he will be also joining us later on today as a panelist. So very excited to hear from you and pick your mind as well. Again, officially welcome you to Fuse 2021. My name is Krishnevsi Champaksi Rabathi. Fairly long, I know, but you can call me Kano. I'll be your MC for the 2 days, and I'm very excited for this event. A little bit about me: I'm a youth and multiculturalism advocate. A lot of the work that I do is with multicultural organizations and youth organizations in a consulting role, in a role where I influence policy, influence future things that are happening. And I absolutely love being in the space. As a migrant myself, I believe that multicultural communities have a lot of strength and a lot of power to make change. And I also believe, and one of the reasons that I love to be here is I believe young people are the biggest pioneers for change. And it's so good to see almost 50 people here coming online all across the country for this important conference. So for this conference, we'll be doing a few things for our online guest, and also for anyone else who may need it. We'll be doing also please all the guests to please do this as well, to give a visual description, pronouns, and if you do know your traditional land name. So I'll give you a bit of an example. My visual description is I'm an Indian man with brown skin. I have a shaved head and a light beard, and I also am wearing a white shirt. And my pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently on Wadawurrung and Burrong lands in Naarm in Melbourne, Victoria. So that is a little bit about me, and I'm extremely excited for this conference, and I'm extremely excited for you guys to see what you guys can get out of it. I believe when you come to events like this, you get out what you put in. So I really want all of you guys to put in your 110%, because you'll be rewarded extremely well. And I won't say too much on the conference. I would like to welcome Carmel Guerra, who is the chair of Mayan, to further welcome you to Fuse 2021. Over to you, Carmel.
There we are. I'm unmuted. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Can I begin by acknowledging Monty Pryor for his acknowledgement of country from Townsville. What a lovely place. I've been there once in my life and I enjoyed it enormously. So I hope to visit one day soon. My name is Carmel Guerra. I am the chair of Mayan Australia and also the CEO of the Centre for Multicultural Youth in Victoria, one of the Mayan partners. So we're really pleased to be here. Kanu, lovely to meet you, and thank you again for agreeing to host this wonderful event. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that I am on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people who are joining us today. And as delegates dialing in from across the country, I'd like to also extend my respect to and acknowledge the traditional custodians and of all the lands of which you are on, and recognise their continuing connection to land, sea and community, and also acknowledge that Mayan is on a journey of partnership with Indigenous community and also in the middle of doing their own rap. So we have lots to learn today. So the issues that we're addressing over the next 2 days are really important to Mayan. Well, again, welcome to Fuse 2021. Gee, it doesn't feel that long ago that we had Fuse 2019. It's our 4th Fuse event. 15 amazing delegates from diverse backgrounds across Australia on Zoom today. Fuse is one and a very important core part of Mayan's work and remains Australia's only national multicultural youth forum. Fuse is unique and a transformative opportunity for emerging young leaders from refugee and migrant backgrounds to come together to build leadership and advocacy skills, expand their networks and connect with peers from all across Australia. Our Youth Ambassadors Network, the YAN, are leading this event, and they've done a bulk of the behind the scenes work with the Mayan staff to bring people together, work as policymakers and decision makers from Australia. So they are trailblazing, building the capacity of young people to become leaders now, to become leaders for the future, and inspire social action on issues that matter to them. We have an amazing and diverse lineup of guests over the next 2 days, and I personally want to welcome them and thank them for taking their time to present and connect with our delegates. And I'd like to also acknowledge the YAN for their incredible work in what has been a challenging year. You may ask, why is Fuse important? Because Mayan believes young people from refugee, asylum seeking and migrant backgrounds have unique experiences and knowledge as experts in their own lives and should be supported to identify and explore the issues impacting on them, find solutions and advocate for positive change. I know, like you know, that today's generation of young people are passionate, resilient and motivated to change the world around them. And we have seen that more than ever over our last 2 years of COVID, particularly, I suppose, in those states where we've been the most hit by COVID. Multicultural young people have stood up and taken on leadership roles. Fuse is grounded in Mayan's understanding of youth participation, advocacy and leadership for young people. Meaningful youth participation is about equipping young people with the knowledge, the skills and resources to overcome barriers to meaningful participation and involvement in the community. So Fuse is unique. It's an exciting opportunity for all of you as young emerging leaders to come together to network and brainstorm key issues impacting young people today. And I look forward to, as many of us do, to the vibrant discussion, critical reflection, and hearing about your ideas and how they can shape the world. I only wish many of us were discussing over the last couple of days that Fuse existed for young people like myself when we were growing up in our 20s, an opportunity to mix with others of the same age, older, younger, with ideas and belief in knowing that they wanted to do something to make the world and Australia and the state you live in a better place. So you are really important, all of you that are here, the 50 of you that have been selected. Congratulations on that opportunity that you've got today and the opportunity you have ahead of you to plan and be involved in Fuse. Well done, and give yourselves a clap. Can I also just take a quick moment, self-indulgent moment, to also acknowledge the challenges in planning the Fuse this year. It has been a phenomenal effort by the Mayan staff and the many YAN delegates and workers involved. The logistical challenges of bringing 50 young people from across Australia together online, but also in city if we can, has been fantastic, but has posed a lot of challenges. So despite these challenges, the Mayan team, the YAN and the young people have created a unique hybrid model for this year's Fuse that will be a mixture of online and in-state activities. So again, congratulations to all of you. I noticed we're running a few minutes early, so I'm hoping I'm about to introduce the minister. So I'm not sure whether he's online or not, because I can't tell, but I'm assuming, oh, I've just heard you're online, Minister, so welcome. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Service and Multicultural Affairs, and very importantly, the member for Mitchell in New South Wales, the Honourable Alex Hawke. Mr. Hawke is a passionate believer in the contribution that multicultural communities have made to Australia, and recognises that cultural diversity is important to Australia's strength in the past and into the future in building this wonderful country we all live in. I understand, Minister, from my Google searching or the staff's Google searching, that you were a Member of Parliament close to 30. So in reality, you're not that much older than the many young people that are here today. So would have a deep understanding of what it's like to be a young adult or young adult in your life wanting to contribute to Australian society. So you will well know what these young people would offer. Just a couple of notes before I hand over to the Minister. I think it's important at these difficult times and because of the nature of the work issues we're discussing today, to acknowledge and also congratulate the Minister for his leadership in response to people fleeing Afghanistan. So thank you for the setup of the panel, which includes a number of community members as well as people from the sector like myself, who are providing advice to you and the government about the best way we can support those communities, but also importantly, giving voice to community members to be part of that. So thank you for that. Also for the commitment the government has made to reopening the humanitarian entrance into Australia. Again, after 2 years of COVID, we know for many of the young people and families we work with, that is a really important step. So thank you for all those important initiatives. Thank you again for on a Saturday morning joining us to give us a few welcoming remarks. So over to you, Minister.
Good morning, and thank you, Carmel, for that kind introduction, and welcome everybody. I'm so glad you're going ahead, to Mayan and everyone involved. It's fabulous that we can continue to do this important work, even though we've had a pretty difficult year and a pandemic which continues to keep people apart, unfortunately. I'd also like to join everyone in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on today, but particularly young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders from around Australia, and the great role they're playing in integrating our multicultural communities into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, and the work they continue to do in their own communities in helping with the youth issues, but also taking on leadership roles for the future. Today, I also want to thank Carmel, Ran Ibrahimi, the Chair and the National Manager of the Mayan Network, for the kind invitation to address you. I thought it was a good time to say a few words to all of the great young people that we have online today before you get on to your Fuse conference. There's so many big issues that you've got here, but we also have a number of days where you're going to be discussing these things with other leaders, and I know some other members of colleagues of Parliament, that'll be joining you to discuss some of the key youth issues. So I welcome that as well from the Parliament. Everybody here knows that Australia's been built on some important values, and those values I think are important for us to reflect on, especially for young people, about why Australia is one of the most sought after destinations by young people from all over the world. Those values of freedom, respect, a fair go and equality of opportunity for everyone mean that we see more people seeking to come to Australia from more cultures and more backgrounds from all over the world. And while it's been a difficult year in the pandemic, and you're great advocates for Australian youth, it's also important to remember the great blessings that we have in Australia and the opportunities that young people have here that are often denied to many young people in so many countries all around the world. And it's an important feature of why Fuse is important, to set the agenda, to make the most of those opportunities, to realise what's been given to you and to take it with both hands and make a great contribution with your life and your youth and your leadership. The centering itself of mine around empowering young emerging leaders from migrant and refugee backgrounds, I think, is very important. In Australia, there are so many opportunities for migrant youth from multicultural backgrounds, whether that be in the economy, in business, whether it be in sport, whether it be in all sorts of other fields, science, technology, art, culture. There are so many things that people can do that I think it is important that you work to equip people with the necessary skills to take advantage of that, to voice concerns, to take leadership roles, and continue to advocate with decision makers and parliamentarians across the parliament. And some of the most pressing issues I think that you are discussing, you've got, I know, climate change. I know you've got mental health, which in particular I would raise mental health this year, and the government continues to be concerned about the impact of 2 years of lockdowns on young school students in particular, the social lack of social interaction that has happened in the last 2 years, which has hurt, I think, the attitudes and the mental health of many young people. So I recommend the discussions you'll have, the allyship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and of course racism, some pretty significant topics. I know these are pressing, and I know you'll be talking about them in a way that'll be quite constructive about what we can be doing together between young people and governments and society to improve the situation for young people in all these areas. But I also wanted to say a little bit about the issue of racism and discrimination, particularly as Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs. Racism continues to be an ongoing concern, and making sure our ongoing strength in our multicultural society continues is really a role that you as young leaders will be more responsible for than anyone else. We're unequivocal, of course, as a government and the federal government, the Morrison government, that racism is unacceptable. It's something that we work with our agencies and our government departments to help, assist with and make sure that we have the right framework of laws and settings in place to minimise and discourage, of course, racism and discrimination against people. If you didn't get the chance to see it this week, the Scanlon Foundation does a great report on social cohesion in Australia, and it's built a great body of data. And there's a few things in there that I think are useful for your discussions that report on the last 12 months of our social cohesion. The incidence of racism and discrimination were about the same at 12%, so not much change, even though we'd had less interaction between humans, less gatherings, less random people bumping together, all kinds of lower activities, but yet we still have the same incidence and rate of discrimination and racism. But negative attitudes towards cultural groups, individual cultural groups, pleasingly was continuing to decline like the year before. So while we've still got racism and discrimination stable in terms of incidences, we have less negative attitudes towards different cultural backgrounds and groups, which was a positive. And the number of people who saw racism and discrimination as a significant issue jumped by 20%, which was from 40% to 60%. So that's almost 2/3 of Australians see racism and discrimination as a significant issue. And look, there were some people read that and misread it as that racism was a big problem in Australia, an increased problem. I didn't read it that way, and I don't think the data is saying that. I think it was saying there's greater recognition of it as an issue, which I think is very important. Lack of understanding or lack of recognition of racism and discrimination, I think, has been a challenge. And that 20% increase in 1 year is unusual, but welcome in the sense that more people, almost 2/3 of Australians, see it as a significant issue that needs addressing, which is an opportunity for you as young leaders to look at that and examine what you will do with that. It's crucial, of course, to the national conversation, and in approach to addressing this, I've sat down with the Race Discrimination Commissioner, Chim Tan. If you haven't heard from him, I highly recommend speaking with Chim Tan. He works with the Australian Human Rights Commission and is developing the National Anti-Racism Framework. So I know the Human Rights Commission is inviting public submissions. It might be a good idea for you to gather up your material, make a public submission. Your ideas and insights as young leaders will be particularly valuable. So from that, I would just summarise for all the issues you're discussing, the government federally is very committed to young people in Australia, making sure you've got those opportunities, that equality of access and opportunity that we see for young people in Australia. And we'll continue to do those things that we think are going to support young people in getting ahead in life and getting the knowledge, the skills, the work experience and the capabilities to be successful and go on to the things that people want to achieve. In the budget, of course, we put forward money. It includes hundreds of millions of dollars, about $600.3 million for the Youth Jobs Path program. That's the prepare and trial and hire program. And this is to help young people who can't find a job get the skills, who are struggling to get in the workforce, get into the workforce as well. And we find that economic empowerment programs are very important for young people. If young people aren't able to access the workforce, the younger they are, the longer they don't go into the workforce, the more challenging it is the older they get to get into the workforce, and the more serious the problem can become. And we have a range of different programs we work through with training. Apprentices, pleasingly, are higher than we've seen them for a long time, young people doing apprenticeships. And we also have put a big focus this year on mental health in terms of our funding, a lot of which will go towards young people. And our Headspace programs, our Headspace centres, many of you will be familiar with those, continue to expand. We're getting more Headspace centres around the country. I've got one here in my own electorate, and it's been fantastic to see how that's evolved, especially engaging young people and youth mental health issues. So with all of that, I would just say to you and recommend your engagement with governments, state and federal. The COVID-19 pandemic continues, I think, to be a massive challenge for those people who are particularly young, a little bit younger than us, Carmel, but who are going through their skills and training years. That is 1 in 100, that incidence, and none of us, to be honest, of any age have lived through that pandemic situation since the last one of the Spanish flu. So really there is no understanding yet of the impact or the longer term impacts, or even if we are one halfway through, it feels like we're coming out of it, but we know with many pandemics they go on for a number of years longer. So I highly recommend what you're doing. I thank you for your advocacy and the role you're playing in leadership around Australia. We need our multicultural youth leaders to step up to help us with all of the integration challenges that we do have in different communities, but continue to keep Australia as one of the best multicultural societies in the world. There are many things we can be doing better. There are many challenges. You're discussing them, and I know Fuse will be, I think, a great step forward for young people in Australia. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Minister. Just a couple of comments. First, again, to thank you. It's a Saturday morning, usually family time, but most of these youth events we run on weekends and after hours. So thank you for making the time, because many of the young people in this room wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet you and to hear from you. We have been engaging with Chintan, which is great. He's been very open. The Commission wants us to hold a consultation with young people around racism. So we're hoping that some of the information that comes out over the weekend we will present to Chintan as well, because he's very committed to involvement of young people. And that challenge put forward are also what many of the young people have told us about. How do young people take the leadership role that they've played already in COVID going forward? So on that, I'll need to take the opportunity to say that hopefully in the new year, maybe a group of these young people could come and talk to you, whether online, on Zoom, whatever, about the recommendations that come out of Fuse, and hopefully engage with you about a conversation to help facilitate it, because many of the issues I will raise will not only be in your portfolio. They are issues around mental health, racism and employment, and we'd love to have your support in engaging in these conversations. So thank you again very much.
Thank you, Carmel. I'd love that. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. And over to you, Kano.
Perfect. Thank you. And from my end, also a massive thank you. I'd like to thank all of our guests. Carmel, thank you for your welcoming words, and the Honourable Mr. Alex Hawke, thank you for your insights and your all the work that you do in the field. And we really appreciate it. And it's so good to hear that the research has showed that there is a bit more awareness, and I think that's credit to everyone in this room for all the advocacy work that we do, all the community work that we do. That is a direct result of that. Also, thank you again so much. Before we move on to the next part, I want to share the topics that each of the states and territories will be working on, and the online group. Cannot forget the online group. So New South Wales, you'll be working on climate change. Western Australia, you will also be working on climate change. Tasmania, you'll be working on First Nations rights. Queensland, Victoria, in the online group, you'll be working on mental health and racism. So again, New South Wales and WA, you'll be working on climate change. Tasmania on First Nations rights. Queensland online group and the Victorian group on mental health and racism. So today we have a few panels that will discuss all those topics and go into more detail. So when you're listening, make sure if you're from that state, really try to listen in. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, because it's important that we think of innovative new solutions. Because I think, you know, the research has shown there is people out there who are aware of this, and we, I guess, us being members of the community, we want to lead the way. And I think, again, young people are the biggest pioneers for change. So I think if you guys step up, present amazing ideas, I think, you know, you do get to present to some pretty high level people who have decision-making powers. So before we move on to our first panel, we'll do a quick check-in activity. I think Martika will pop a link in the chat. And also, the Honourable Mr. Alex Hawke will also leave us for this session. We just again want to thank you for your time again, and hopefully you can join us and see all the work the amazing young people have done in the future. So on your phones, go onto www.menti.com and use the code, and just write down a few words, one word as to how you're feeling about starting Fuse. So again, you feel free to use the QR code or go on the Mentimeter, www.menti.com, and type in the code 77124991. So it is a check-in, whatever you're feeling. It is anonymous, so it is your word. No one else will know. Well, we've got words coming left, right, center. We have, I can't even keep up. Excited, nervous, empowered, grateful, revolution, hopeful, intrigued, confused as well. That's perfectly okay. Hopeful, stoked, inspired. Well, there's a lot of words coming. I have to keep on tilting my head just to make sure I can read them properly. But keep them coming. And this is an activity that we'll do pretty much every at the start of today and tomorrow, and then also at the end of the day. So just to see how we're feeling, checking in, and just making sure we're present in the conference. Perfect. See, I love how the graph or the word cloud is moving depending on what everyone else puts. I think the biggest words that I'm seeing are people are excited, intrigued into what's going to be happening, a few nerves, and that's completely okay. I think being nervous is sometimes a good thing. That means that you want to do good, you want to give your best foot forward, and sometimes that is nerve-wracking because you don't want to make a mistake. So I think a little bit of nerves on the first day is completely okay. Confused, intrigued, a few emojis I see, very cool, very creative. Real, cautious, open-mindedness, motivated, thankful, fun, all these words, I'm loving them, team. Keep them coming. I'm loving all the emojis and all the hype going around. Perfect. So before we move on to the next topic, we do also have one amazing thing which I want to plug in. If Martika, if you could also put in the social QR, whiteboard QR code. And to give you a bit of background what this is, it's pretty much, look, we're not in person, unfortunately. Some of us are, but not all of us are. So what this whiteboard is, you can go online and every delegate's name will be there, including your YAM members, everyone's names will be there. And if you want to leave a positive comment, feel free to do that, because I believe, you know, you're meeting young people, you're making connections, you want to leave a good comment that they can read at the end of the conference. So if Martika could probably put it up in the chat, you'll be able to go on there, find whose name you want, and write a good comment on there. Perfect. Alrighty, team. I think we might have some issues with the social QR code, but we'll post that in the next gap. That's okay. Before we move on, I would like to officially go onto the panel, but I did hear some nerves. That is a word that I did hear, but trust me, I just want to share a quick story, a 30-second story. So this morning I was very excited. I'm like, look, it's going to be an amazing event. I'm looking forward to it. And then, you're getting ready. You're like, do my hair. Not that I have to do my hair, but I was getting ready. And then something went in my eye. And when something goes in your eye, you cannot open your eyes. You're trying to put water over it. You're trying to see, your eyes goes red. That was me this morning. So you might have noticed I was a bit of a rush, but that's just something when you plan things, they don't always go to plan. And that's something I want you guys to keep in mind, that, you might be here with expectations of, well, this is how the event may go. But sometimes that doesn't happen, and that's completely okay. I think when you don't remove those expectations and go in with an open mind to learn, to embrace, and to challenge your ideas, to think of new ideas with other people, I think it leads to more growth and more change. So I just want to share that quick story that not everything you plan goes to plan. Now, I'm very excited to move to our first panel, which is about First Nations rights. And I would like to officially welcome our first guest, who has already done the Welcome to Country, Mr. Monty Pryor. He is an Indigenous Australian born in Townsville, North Queensland in 1950. His father is from the Birri Nation of the Bourne region, and his mother's tribal group from Yarrabah near Kant in the Kuganjidi Birri. Apologies if I pronounce any of the names incorrectly. Please feel free to correct me. Birri travels extensively as a performer and a public speaker for school students and adult groups throughout Australia and overseas. In 2012, Birri was selected to be Australia's first children's laureate, along with Alison Lester. Birri has worked in numerous industries, including education, film, television, modeling, sport, and music. He has played in 2 World Masters games in basketball competition, winning a silver medal for Australia in 1994. He has written many books with me, McDonald, as well. I'd like to welcome Mr. Birri Monty Pryor again.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. You go on.
I'm sorry. I would like to, before we introduce our panelists, I'd like to also welcome our second panelist, Alicia Johnson. Alicia Johnson is a Leti Birri Gubi and Waka Waka woman. Grew up in rural New South Wales, relocating to Sydney as a teenager with a family for better opportunities and access to. Alicia is a PhD candidate at Sydney, writing on environmentalism, highlighting the importance of Indigenous knowledge and influence of ecofeminism. Alicia began producing content online, contributing where First Nations people are retelling many narratives through an Indigenous lens, challenging Australian beliefs and opinions regarding Aboriginal people historically and contemporary, especially the lived experience of First Nations women, the effects of colonization regarding their bodies and babies. So again, officially welcome Alicia Johnson. And I would like to welcome our facilitator, who is a South Australian Youth Ambassador, Fatima. Over to you guys for the panel.
Thanks, Kano. Thank you for that introduction. And again, we'd like to welcome Monty and Alicia. So I'm the South Australian Young Ambassadors member, and I am coming to you from Nipaluna, Tasmania. So to start off, I will pass it on to, we've already met Monty, so I'll pass it on to Monty to just quickly introduce himself, the land that he's on, and visual descriptions.
Okay, I am currently in Townsville on Walgarookaba country. My nation on dad's side starts from just over Ross River going south. I'm brown skin, I'm wearing a yellow shirt, and I'm old. So, my mother's people are Birri Gubba. I mean Kunganji, and my dad's mob is Birri Gubba. So is that all?
Yeah, thank you so much, Monty. I'll pass it on to Alicia.
Okay, thank you.
Hey everyone, my name's Alicia. I'm coming to you all from Western Sydney, so I'm here on Darug country, and I guess my descriptions are also brown. I'm wearing a fabulous pair of earrings, and I also have brown hair and brown eyes.
Thanks, Alicia. Again, we're very honoured to have both of you today as part of a panel. Now, to start off with, just like in terms of the questions, I'll ask it, but it's open to both of you. So you're more than welcome to answer both questions as well. If you are not comfortable, feel free to pass. But yeah, so in terms of, so let's say my background, I am half Philippine and half Iraqi. So probably my first question I would say is, how do you stay connected to your culture? So like for me, it's more so, I still like to eat Asian food at home because that's what I love the most. Even though I have moved and grown up in Australia, I still prefer my Asian food. What about you, Alicia?
That's an incredible question, and please, if I stumble on any words, Uncle Monty Pryor, I am such a fan, and I met you like many years ago, but Wuyan, and anyone that's tuning in today, this is a really respected Aboriginal elder, and young people like me were inspired to read and write, and I guess my place in academia was really inspired by your books as a little girl out bush in Broken Hill, giving them a read. So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that. But for me, a big way that I stay connected to my culture, particularly during, I guess, schooling, was accessing those resources. So reading, those different tools and art, that's a really big one for us as Aboriginal people. So I always have some canvas in my house or some paints, and I also have a 5-year-old now. So for us, like storytelling, I guess what I'm trying to say is really important. And if I see any of my relatives around, I always literally quite ask them for a story, and that really goes with what we are as Aboriginal people and many other First Nations people too, around being storytellers and having an oral history. So I love a good yarn and making sure we stay connected.
Thanks, Alicia. And I feel like a lot of the young people can relate as well in terms of storytelling, because that's where you can actually talk about your experiences, and then even though some people might have a different experience, in some way, the storytelling, you can actually share the similarities as well. What about you, Uncle Monty?
Alicia, thank you for following up with the books. I really appreciate it. It makes me feel great that a young person like yourself, loving the way you speak, and you feel great about yourself. That's amazing. That's awesome. Keep it up. Now, I've been very lucky here, I suppose, that I grew up hunting, tracking, making spears when I was younger. So I still do a bit of that when I've got time. Just been over to Palm Island. That's where Mum and Dad were born. And I grew up there, Townsville, Bowen and Cairns. So I suppose mainly coming back home all the time is what keeps me centered. I've got 7 sisters and 3 brothers. So, you know, people say, you know, you must be, people say, you're famous. I said, no, ask my sisters. They'll tell you I'm not. So it's really good, that grounding, and the spirit of my family is always through stories, but also all that mixture of love and pain, and all of those things are really great things that keep me together. So, and through our stories as well.
Yeah, in terms of the whole family dynamics as well, again, as a lot of the young people, we can relate to being family oriented. So even though, yes, as much as you love your siblings, you always have that sibling rivalry. They'll always try and ground you with the things that you have in life. But no, that was really good. So thank you for that. I think the next question would be, since we're talking about home as well, a lot of young people are quite confused in terms of, so what is the difference between welcome to country and acknowledgement of country? Like, what are the differences between both?
Alicia, do you want to go?
I reckon you'll give a good answer to that one.
Okay. Well, welcome is really important, and acknowledgement, and they're different, but they have different flavors. I remember going out to Uluru years ago, and I walked into the room where they had all the stuff happening, and the main elder was across the room, and he had this hat on, and he just looked across the room and caught my eye, and we looked at each other for like 10 seconds, and he just smiled and nodded his head, which meant I was welcome. And everywhere I went, everybody knew who I was, just from that, just a nod of the head. So there's that aspect from the elder that everybody looks up to and looks after the community. And there's acknowledgement of what hasn't been addressed. I think that's what it's about, the acknowledgement of what has not been addressed. And sometimes people get, why do we have to say welcome to country? Because it's like, well, you haven't done it, and you haven't, I think the word reconciliation is a white word, because if you look it up in the dictionary, it says two people or parties have been together and then they break up and then they have to get back together. Well, we have never been together in this country. We've never sat at the same table. And I just look at the Uluru Statement. So that kind of says it, sums it up. So I think that's what I see.
And I'll add on to that, because I loved that like notion of what a welcoming is. So you can be physically welcomed by traditional owners, as what Uncle was describing, but I guess maybe from your perspective, like a welcome is when a traditional owner can do it. So as you've heard that Uncle Monty is on his country, or has lived on his, or living, are you living there now?
I will, if I just go across the river, I will be.
So he's able to give a welcome on his country, but for me, who's living on someone else's country, so I'm on Daruk land, I can only do an acknowledgement because I'm not the owner of this land. So, but in saying that, what Uncle Monty was speaking about was ways that you're welcomed on country by those traditional owners through different forms as well. You know, you don't always have to be welcomed through the language. Sometimes they may offer a cup of tea or a yarn as well. So yeah, that's my add to that.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Uncle Monty. I think it's really important as well that you highlight the fact about the reconciliation. I think that is something that we have to think about as well as migrants and refugees, that because we are not of Indigenous background of this First Nation rights, it does make sense. Now, in saying that though, so what do you think leadership and advocacy looks like in the role that you're doing at the moment, and how can we as refugees and migrant background be allies as part of this?
Alicia.
Well, I love this question, and I will also share my daughter's father is a refugee, and he comes from Sierra Leone, and we were together for many years, 10 in fact. So through that journey of learning about each other and each other's cultures, I also learned the lack of education that Australian born or people that go through Australian school systems, there's a lack of knowledge. Immigrants and refugees have that exact same experience. You know, people are not being taught about First Nations experiences. You know, if you look, if it's not on Channel 7, or if your teacher's not telling you, and even universities, it's so difficult to access that information. And a lot of the yarns I have had, even throughout where I live in Western Sydney, in the Bankstown area, that it's very multicultural. People are always looking for more information. They always want to ask questions and hear about these experiences. So I think it really speaks to this lack of information, and again, the Australian government failing us. And I'd like to add as well, I want to know more. I want to know more about people from refugee experiences, or people that have immigrated to Australia. What was that experience like? What was the reason for you feeling like you've had to flee, or importantly, migrate sometimes across the world? But that lack of information and being able to communicate, have a young talk, again, is a real implication of our government failing us as a people, and again, contributing to us as a society.
Thank you, Alicia. Uncle Monty?
Well, it's really interesting because I remember I was at the Writers' Festival at the start of last year in Adelaide, and there was this beautiful African man talking about his life and almost dying, and it was like really tragic. And I felt really sad. And I thought, he's coming to this country. And I said, get in line, because we haven't dealt with Aboriginal people yet. And I think that's the problem, is that people with backgrounds of pain are coming to this country that is still in pain, because we haven't dealt with the past. And I disagree with the minister. People say, is this a racist country? Yes, it is. You can throw all the data you want all over the place, but I live it. So does Alicia. So I think that we have to actually start from there. And just another story, I was over Carmel Island, and we're having discussions about preschoolers on Palm. And on Palm Island, there were 43 nations. Last year was the 100th year that they made them prisoners on Palm Island. And remember, we got to vote in 67, but it's still lingered on. The 43 nations were sitting on somebody else's land. And so talking about having the little ones, the 3, 4, 5-year-olds, learn about their culture, and like really, we had this great 2-day event, which was awesome. And Shawnee Chilbra, my cousin, he and I went over there, and when I talked, I said, you know, present time, we're in this moment, and in this moment, we're talking about how we can heal the lilies. So lilies, but I'm always internal. So the moment, what we have to do is unpack that this moment we're in and why we're in this moment, and go back the minutes, the hours, and find out how we got to here. So what we've got to do is heal the ones that are, you know, we're dealing with 100 years of pain. So dealing with that, then we can deal with the lilies, and I've got programs that I've been putting in place that will do that. And lots of times the government do this all the time. They just throw money at it and just leave it, and it doesn't work. What it takes really is internal, like what we're doing now. You and I can see your face. I'm talking to you, and the government doesn't want any part of that. And I think that that's where we miss out, and that's why we're still a sick country.
And I'd love to add to that, because I 100% agree. And that's what's happening in this country is, like, you know, we were never afforded the opportunity to speak our language publicly. So let's just start on language. If we spoke, or even in Uncle Monty's time, if we spoke publicly in certain areas, your children would be removed. If you practice ceremony. So what we mean by ceremony is anything. So a dance, or even coming together and yarning, or funeral practices. So our traditional funeral practices, you could be arrested, your children could be removed. And this is in Uncle's lifetime, but it's also in my auntie's and uncle lifetime. So that is really what is a really difficult point right now, I think, with navigating this space around, I guess, people from other backgrounds and again, experiencing brutal colonization, is there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I'd also like to add, now, even contemporarily, if our children speak our traditional languages in Australia, but they have an accent, or they can't read and write, or they can't pronounce their vowels properly, it makes the parent look like, oh, you know what, that those Aboriginal parents aren't looking after their children. Those Aboriginal parents aren't teaching their children the right way. And we are our children are 7 times more likely to be removed than non-Indigenous children. So that's your children. So my daughter is more likely to be removed 7 more times than your Australian-born children will be. And that's the conversations we really start to have.
And that's what we talked about on Palm Island as well. So,
thank you, Alicia and Uncle Monty. I think in summary, it shares the same sentiment as to how the government has been dealing with the way, in terms of the education system and the practices that we are allowed to actually do in public. Because again, in terms of the refugees and migrants, even though it's not technically the same, but like Uncle Monty said, we have to heal, because we can't come into a country, or we can't be accepted in a country where when their own people, their own Indigenous people are not healed or have not accepted the past that has been happening and is still happening to this day. Now, so let's say, because when I moved to Australia, I didn't know the background of Australia Day. Like, I thought it was just, oh, okay, you know, it's Australia Day. But obviously now knowing what has happened in the history of Australia Day, a lot of people like me, they tried to join the celebrations just so they could feel that they fit in. What is your take on this?
Well,
Yep, you go.
okay. I think that it just continues on, because if you think of new people coming here, quote, Australians love to eat their food, take away whatever, but they don't want to know the culture, and they call it names. So in this country, they do the same with blackfellas, is that they love to sell their culture off to the world and say we're great, and not respect the people that they take it from.
I absolutely love that sentiment. And I 100% agree, because I'm sure many of you would have seen, oh, they'll have a food stall at the Australia Day Festival. Oh my gosh, they'll have you jump on stage and do a dance, but are they talking about the racial abuse that you receive, or the fact that your religion can't be practiced, you know, openly, or the fact that, you know, so many people from multicultural backgrounds know places in Sydney they can't go? It's like Australia will not talk about the violence that many of you in this room would have experienced. And I hope, you know, you are keeping safe in mind, but Australia, you will see, will start to characterize your identity or exploit it for the best bits that they like. Meanwhile, you're not safe to walk through in Sydney, let's say Bondi, you know, or you can't even go down to the beach without, you know, prying eyes, or even more so abuse. So I love that sentiment around Australia Day and wanting to belong. But in saying that, always have in the back of your mind and encourage your families to really critically think about, are we really a part of Australia Day, or is our cuisine or our beautiful traditional attire or our beautiful dances, but again, is that really being respected and appreciated?
Yes.
And hopefully it is. I hope there are some councils in Australia that are doing their homework. I really hope they are.
See, there's want to and have to. You know, really, if you really want to have something on, it has to come from the inside. If you just throw it in there, same as education, they never had what they've got in now, to a point, even 5 to 10 years ago on Aboriginal people. It was just a side dish. So it was just put in there because they had to. And even today, you know, like there's a school that I gave a talk to some teachers, and one of the teachers spent 5 or 6 years over on Carmel Island, and she was, if you survive that, then you're doing pretty well, because it's really hard work over there, and I work over there every year for the last 20 years. So there's this new Catholic school, and they're starting out from the start. They're saying invasion instead of settled. And then one of the teachers said, one of the people in charge says, oh, so-and-so, you take that because you're into that stuff, you know, Aboriginal stuff. So it's like, we've got to get away from that aspect of it's Aboriginal stuff. No, it's, you need to, you know, because this is the base, you know, the people don't understand that we are the base of this country. And without a base, we all fall over. And it's just really simple.
Yeah, no, thank you, Uncle Monty and Alicia. I can feel the passion in that question as well, because I agree with, so yeah, having, you know, this dance and this food and things like that, it's more so tokenism in a way. Again, it depends on what the meaning behind it as well, and like where it is coming from. Now, in saying that, what do we think needs to be changed or restructured to ensure that the new Australians that are coming in, so the new migrants and refugees coming into the country, understands the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history?
better leadership. There's a bloke in charge now, ran a campaign, Stop the Boats, but he also said last year that there was no slavery in Australia. So we need better leaders. And people always say to me, you know, why don't you swear at him? I said, no, I don't have to say anything because he names himself by his actions. So he doesn't need to be in my head. We just need somebody who's in charge, that's a statesman or woman, you know, that can work towards unifying us rather than separation. And I love my beautiful friend, Gary Foley, my mentor, one of my mentors. This is where it's really, people don't understand. He said, if all the black fellows were to die today, there'd be 2 to 3 million white people out of work. So there still are professors in universities studying me and Alicia. So I think when people look at me and say, you're wasting our money, I said, no, go and see the professors. And so that is the separation I'm talking about, and the things that people don't know about and don't see. Alicia?
Yeah, and I think what I'd add to that from someone from a refugee or an immigrant background is understand, like, your allyship is going to look different to what a white person's would. Okay, and what we're seeing a lot of right now is what it means to be an ally is from white people in this country. Recognize the traditional owners, or what reconciliation action plan are you having in your workplace, or what was your history, you know, coming to this country from throughout Europe. What we have to start understanding is everyone's journey as an Australian is unique. So your journey to understanding or respecting First Nations people is going to be unique. But in saying that, it's your responsibility. So that what happened in the past is happening now. We are still enduring a genocide in this country. Aboriginal women are the most growing and the largest population within prison systems. So we're seeing Aboriginal mums, just like me, going to prison for the same crimes that non-Indigenous people get to go home and be with their families. And that has to be enough for each and every single one of you to think, oh shit, I need to do my homework. I really need to start thinking about what is happening for the peoples whose land that I get to live on. And another really interesting point, and again, the reason why I spoke about my daughter's lineage and her background is because her dad got to come to this country, not for a fresh start. He still has his trauma and his PTSD. He survived a civil war. But what he gets to do is have a fresh start. He gets to have a clean opportunities. And he does experience racial discrimination and things of that nature, but that opportunity to flee is not afforded to us as First Nations people. If I try to apply for a protection visa, if I try to apply, I need to flee from this country, I'm being racially persecuted around the globe, that's not going to be recognized. So those levels of opportunity within Australia, internalized, are problematic, but also externally as well. And we really need to start engaging with these issues as hard as they are. It's everyone's responsibility.
Yes.
I think Fatima, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Thank you so much, Alicia. There's a lot of things you said, and Uncle Monty as well, that are very strong, and I feel like that needs to be changed definitely within the way our new Australians are being taught about original history. Now, Alicia, I've just got a couple questions, and this one's for you. Now, learning from your daughter's father's culture, so from your partner, did you see the similarities in both Aboriginal and some African cultural practices, and what does that entail?
Yeah, that's such an amazing question. And again, there were so many similarities. So literally a culture that's hundreds and thousands of kilometers away, but those really things that are deeply ingrained, for example, notion of like what woman's business is, or a woman's kind of role, and then what a man's is as well. So we had a lot of similarities around there. Also similarities around elders. So within West African culture, elders are really respected, they're really valued and left in whole position of power, as it says ours, but also in saying that we had a lot of differences. And I think that's really, was a beautiful thing, because I got to learn new things and be challenged around what I knew. And so did he. And we have to understand, as people of color, so people that again are not from Anglo or Celtic, but I'm going to say Celtic, I want to acknowledge Celtic, not within that demographic, because they have their own culture and belief as well. But we have to understand those things that created our societies, those elements that created our cultures and our families and our structures, they need to be celebrated. You know, the white man's world is failing us. So when I would have yarns with my daughter's father about how does a society function in another country, I would always be so inspired by, you know, resourcefulness and, again, the genius that comes from being poor. So I think each of us in this room have so much to contribute to this failing male-dominated system of what our country is running on right now.
Oh, Alicia, I love that, especially when you said that this white man world is failing us, because I feel like, again, a lot of us that are currently present in this conference feels the same way. There are definitely gaps that needs to be filled. In saying that, Uncle Monty, in regards to like the languages, are there any current programs for language learning or exchange with Indigenous Aboriginal people that we can connect with? Is that like in the centre or online, or?
Firstly, just adding on to what Alicia said, you know, I always say that we are following in the footsteps of dead white males. We've got to stop that and make our own footprints. And you are the ones, newcomers and us together can make that difference. And on that point of language, in Yarrabah, we have a language school, which hopefully I'll be going back to be a student and have my mother's side language learnt I'll be able to speak fluent Kunga in 2 or 3 years. And on my dad's side, it's a bit abstract and a bit all over the place, but we're gathering that as well. And I don't know if there's anywhere you can go online. I suppose you'd have to look that up and ask someone. But I think there is. Yeah. So that's my point. That's what I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Uncle Monty. And I think we only have time for one last question, and I'm opening this both up to both of you. So we'll probably start with you, Uncle Monty. Do you think having an Indigenous leader or representative in the Parliament will help solve Australian issues? Well,
kind of yes, but in my latest book, Story Doctors, there's the King Billy plate is in part of the picture. And the King Billy plate, if you look it up in Google, it's written in the white way that says, you know, this fanfare, we have given this to the leader to celebrate his power to do whatever. But no, it's not. It's just so that you don't have to deal with the rest of them and just deal with one person. So whenever I see anybody in Parliament, bless them, is that I see them wearing a King Billy plate. And the Uluru statement stamps my point, is that we have no power. You know, it's okay to white fellas to say, oh, we've got this and that. Well, no, but they have no power. So I think, yes, it would be great if we had a man or woman, Aboriginal man or woman in power as the leader.
What about you, Alicia?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's not what we're seeing right now, you know, is Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people in leadership. And what I'd also like to add, and I guess many of you in the room as well, is like, we don't need people. I mean, it's ironic considering that I'm like living my whole life in uni, but we don't need them to be uni qualified. They don't need to have these certificates or these experiences, you know. our Indigenous elders and people in our society, you know, that could be in these roles of leadership, they should be provided the opportunity. And I'd like to add that as well to this multicultural sense of multiculturalism. I think people that can contribute to making this country better should not be put on Western, you know, ideas of acceptability. You know, we aren't required to have a university degree to be a good person, or to know what's best for the environment, or to know what's the best for your local council. So I'd like to add that as well, is if we're adding people to these places, let them be the way they want to be.
Yep.
Oh, I love that, Alicia. I think we just have actually one last question that popped in. So it says on here, I used to follow you on TikTok and what you call out any internalized racism within your community. You'd call out people within your own culture. So brave and incredible to fight against the standards. How do we, as migrant or refugee, continue to hold people accountable?
I love that comment. And again, wherever I kind of go in spaces, I'm kind of either respected, so people like my work, or I'm notorious. So I have called out Indigenous people within our communities for being exploitative, for using aspects such as white passing privilege. I've called out Indigenous people for exploiting the community, so speaking over what's happening on the ground floor or in the grassroots, and I've been criticized for that, you know. But I think that internal dialogue, and I encourage you to do that within your own communities as well. Obviously, you're enlightened. You've committed to coming to this session today and the rest over the next 2 days. But are other people within your family, are other people within your community talking about First Nations people? Are you having these discussions with those people in your family and community? And why are you not? Why are you turning away or just looking in an opposite direction? And I think that can speak to your privilege. For us and Uncle Monty, when we get off this this moment, our lives go back to the hellhole of what this country is for us. If it's going to Woolworths and being racially discriminated, if it's being pulled over in the car and I'm afraid that I'm going to get dragged out by a police officer, or if it's going to a park and being told, you know, you're drinking or causing, you know, what do they call it? What do the police have to say? Being disorderly. We are under threat. We are at risk every single minute. And if that's something I can leave you all with is, what do you want to be like? Do you want to be an invested ally, or do you want to be like the rest of the Australians that have lived here for 200 and something years? And I guess my final remark before we run off here, and I'd like to close with Uncle Monty as well, is when your families make food, when your mum or your nana or your auntie or even your pop, whoever it is in your family that make these dishes, that make these foods that, you know, warm your soul and your spirit, they always make enough where there's leftovers. They'll make enough for everyone in the household to have 2 or maybe 3 servings, but a pot is going in the fridge. And that is something that I have learned from engaging with people from different backgrounds. But let me tell you, in white society, there is no pot going in the fridge. In white society, there is no leftovers. And that is representative of what this country is doing to each other and our own families. It's our responsibility to nourish each other and always make sure there's a bit of leftovers for somebody else.
Alicia, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Uncle Monty, did you want to say any last words in regards to that?
Well said, Alicia. I just went to the fridge before and there's a pot in there.
I was about to say, black fellas, we always have leftovers.
There is a big pot in the fridge. So yeah, I think when I was younger, there was no money. There was just us trying to find out who we were to fight. You know, because on Palm you weren't allowed to do all the things that Alicia said. It was that you know, weren't allowed to speak to the women, the men, weren't allowed to do any kind of culture. I remember my Auntie Val telling me that she was sitting down and they had porridge or something, and they didn't have any milk, and my auntie had to eat it, and this guy was walking around with a little whip thing, and she put it in her mouth and there was weevils in it, and she could feel them crawling around in her mouth, and then when he went past, he spat it on the ground. And she got whipped for that. And she had to wear a sugar bag, got her head shaved, and she had to sweep the streets. So that's just one story from one aunt. So I think that, you know, you don't know and other people don't know that's what I'm dealing with, right? And I know that refugees are coming here and are scarred and hurt from over there, from where they come from. So what chance have they got to find a way to heal unless we heal first, in a sense? So back in the day, there was no money. So the government's really great at, I noticed the minister talking about billions of dollars, whatever. And that's the trick that the government does, is throw money at it. And then what happens, it's like Blackfellas got no money, so they just throw, oh, we got 10 million, we'll throw it in, and everybody fights over it. So it's like, it's not about culture anymore, it's about money. So I think we're dealing with a lot of, most communities do deal with that. But in the end result, it's just a simple aspect of what we're doing now, sitting down and talking to each other. And if you haven't watched, I've got a series called Wrong Kind of Black, and it's on Netflix. It almost won an Emmy Award. Have a look at that. But also, I've got a new book out called Story Doctors, and it's this lovely picture book that deals with everything that we're talking about today. So, thank you very much, Alicia. Well said. You know, I'm proud of you. Keep strong.
Thank you so much, Uncle Monty, and thank you, Alicia. I'd just like to reiterate that please, for the people that we have here, as much as possible, support your local artists, and support your Indigenous artists as well. And I'd just like to say again, very, very massive thank you. We really are honoured to have both of you today to be part of a panel. And I know a lot of the participants today would leave feeling quite inspired. Oh, hello. I'm feeling quite inspired and really passionate about this topic. Now I'll just pass it back on to Kano.
Thank you.
Thank you again so much, Alicia and Uncle Monty, for all of your wise words and your wisdom. I think it really shows the importance of listening to Indigenous people and people who are from the lands that we live on, and we will continue our generations. And I think we took a lot out of it. Again, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and sharing your experiences, the good and the bad.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to all the delegates, we'll be going to a quick 5-minute break. Please be back by around 12:48 for our next panel. So feel free to have a coffee or a tea, and we'll be back at 12:48. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for being patient. Hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of an extended break. Just to grab everyone's attention, we are about to kick off into our second panel of the day. It is about climate change, that I'm personally very excited for, and I think we have two amazing guests and an amazing facilitator in store for this next session. So first of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Rabathi Harrison. Apologies if I mispronounce any of the words. Rabathi is a proud Kiribati person currently living on Guerra and Torres land, a UQ alumnus in the biomedical sciences. Rabathi has also been involved in community work for nearly 10 years with the local Kiribati communities within the wider Brisbane area, and is passionate about nurturing and sharing his culture. So can we give a huge welcome to Mr. Rabathi Harrison? Perfect. And then I'd like to welcome our second panelist, Ms. Vanika Malawapi. Is a Zenith, Kes and Papuan storyteller. She's a Mianjin-based 350 Australian community organizer and digital storyteller for the landmark Torres Strait climate justice case, Our Islands, Our Home. Waniki is passionate about amplifying the voices of those on the front lines of climate crisis through different art mediums. And also, could we please give a massive welcome to Vanika Malawapi? Perfect. And I'd like to welcome our facilitator for today, Queensland Youth Ambassador Mary. I'll hand it over to you guys for this next session about climate change.
Awesome. Can you hear me, Kano? Awesome. Thank you, Kano, and welcome Waniki and Robust. Thanks for joining us today. We had a little bit, we're all calling in from Mianjin, so we had a little bit of a time difference dilemma, but we're all here now, so thanks for joining us. My name is Mary, as Kano mentioned. As a visual description, I am brown, but currently under yellow lighting. I have long black hair. I have cowrie shell Papuan earrings, and I'm wearing a Pacifica brown top. I'm really excited to facilitate this panel with you all today. We're going to keep it light. We're going to keep it as a conversation because that's just how we do it as Pacifica and First Nations people. And we hope that you can engage with us through the chat with questions. Robust and Wanaki, I think I'll just put out the first question to you both. We are all multicultural people tuning in of refugee, migrant, and asylum seeker background. So our first question is, what is the climate crisis? Like, what does it look like to you? What is it? And how does climate change continue to affect you and your community?
Thank you, Mary. Hello, everybody. I think I might just begin, if you don't mind, Wanaki. But before I do, I just want to first acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I'm zooming in from today, the Jagera and Turrbal people of Mianjin, also called Brisbane. I acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging, and thank them for their continual custodianship in taking care of country in this region for tens of thousands of millennia. And I also want to extend that acknowledgement to any First Nations people here with us today. So yeah, just real quick intro as well. Hi everyone, I'm Robust. I'm from the islands of Kiribati, as mentioned. But yeah, so I guess for that first question, it's pretty heavy question when I was thinking about it. But I guess through a Pacific lens, or more specifically a Kiribati lens, the climate crisis is something we've been dealing with for decades. My people have noticed many years ago changes in weather patterns, natural resources becoming scarcer, the tides getting higher and closer to homes, and food sources that were once abundant are depleting over time. Kiribati, like all Pacific nations, contribute the least to the climate crisis, and yet they are generally the first to feel its effects. I've heard many stories and I've seen for myself how homes have been washed away by the sea, crops not bearing a fruitful harvest due to how salty the soil has become. Weather disasters such as cyclones have become more frequent when they weren't as frequent before. Freshwater reservoirs becoming non-drinkable because of the saltwater intrusion due to sea levels rising. All these things and more contribute to a massive burden on the people of Kiribati, and by and large, the Pacific as a whole, including food security, health, and well-being. I might just keep it short there. We could probably get into more things later, but I'll let Wanaki explain as well.
Thank you, Rob. I'd also just like to introduce myself. My name is Vanika Malawapi. I'm a Papuan and Malukiwa woman from Wigu in Zanatkas, which is the traditional name of the Torres Strait Islands. Yes, so the Torres Strait Islands, like Kiribati, are also on the front lines of climate change. And like Rob has said, my community as well contribute the least to the climate crisis, but we are experiencing the most intense effects of it. Data shows that many islands of the Torres Strait may submerge within our lifetime due to rising sea levels caused by climate change. And my home island, Boiku, our home island town, the village used to be a shape of a crocodile head. And that was a sacred place to us and to some families' totems. And due to erosion, our village no longer looks like that. And yeah, the coast changes. The rising sea levels are getting closer and closer to our ancestors' burial sites. And there are other islands that I've visited that have already lost their ancestors. They've been swallowed by the sea. And this is something that no one should ever have to face in any of our lifetimes, that our ancestors and those that we are connected to are taken away due to these issues. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Wanaki, and thanks, Robust. And I just want to acknowledge that I know this topic hits close to home, because for both of you, as you've both explained, climate change isn't just about the sorry, physical effects. We're talking about connection to land, connection to sea, connection to sky, connection to our community. And all of that exists together in one whole kind of identity shell. And so I just want to acknowledge that it is a difficult topic to talk about. And so for all of us, if we get emotional at any point, everybody, it's because we are okay, but we care. And this topic is really close to our hearts. So I guess, it does sound very doom and gloom, but we know that First Nations people, Pacifica people, those on the front lines are also the same ones that are standing up and fighting back. And so I guess I'm going to put the next question to you both in. How do you fight or advocate for climate justice? What does that look like? And what does that feel like for you? Would you like to go first, Rabathi?
No worries, also. So my work in the climate space has always been inspired by my people's resilience. Although we've been fighting against the effects of climate change for many, many years, we as a people have not lost hope that our way of life will remain as it was since thousands of years ago. As my people, like you said, Mary, are on the front lines of climate change, I'm able to use my voice and my platform here in Australia, away from my homelands, to bring their stories to the front lines of climate justice. For me, as someone who grew up in the islands, learning my culture, I use this as a tool to bring forth awareness for our cause. Through cultural methods such as dancing, singing, and storytelling, I've been able to move communities to action. Through Pacific Climate Warriors, for those who aren't, I guess, or don't know what the Pacific Climate Warriors are, they're a youth-led initiative that elevates the stories of Indigenous communities of the Pacific on the front lines of the climate crisis. And in doing so, they tend to educate people about the effects of climate change, why the Pacific matters, and why actions to save the planet require urgency. They are also leaders in charting responses to this crisis that can uphold human rights, just as a quick brief. But yeah, a lot of our work has also been very family-centered and family-friendly, with projects such as Matangi, a short film that depicts how our elders have kept their, I guess, cultures well intact and alive away from home, and continue to pass this knowledge down to generations after them. There was also a project, Color Between the Front Lines, which was a coloring in book initiative that served as an extension of this Matangi project during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. This project saw parents printing out coloring in sheets of our Matangi characters from the short film, where the topic of climate change could be brought up, I guess, organically in a safe and in gentle environment within the home, where that dialogue can occur naturally. But I think one of my proudest, I guess, achievements or moments within the Pacific Climate Warriors was a project that we did called Breaking Ground Frontline Truth Storytelling Tour. A mouthful, but it was a pretty cool event and the first of its kind here in Queensland, actually, where it was a Pacific-led event where we brought local Pacific communities into the city of Logan here in so-called Meanjin or Brisbane. And then this tour traveled to the traditionally coal mining city of Rockhampton, where community leaders were able to share their lived experiences of climate change to a packed out event center, two of which were packed out, while at the same time sharing culture through traditional song and dance. And I guess the reason we tend to model our activism with Indigenous methods is because that's what comes naturally to us. We make relations, we share stories, and through this we move communities and we create change.
Thanks, Rabathi. And what about you, Vanika?
Thanks, Rob and Mary. So myself, I'm an organizer for the Torres Strait Climate Justice Islands Are Home campaign. And that's a landmark case which 8 Torres Strait Islanders are taking the Australian federal government to the United Nations over their inaction on climate change in our homelands. The claimants have 5 demands: fund adaptation programs that will allow Zenith communities to adapt to climate impacts, commit to going 100% renewables in Australia in the next decade, support Zanatkas communities to build community-owned renewable energy, transition away from fossil fuels as rapidly as possible through a just transition for workers, and push the world to increase global ambitions, keep warming to less than 1.5 degrees. The massive focus on our campaign is that we are elevating those that are on the front lines in our homelands. I live on mainland here in Myanmar, but my father grew up and lives in the islands, and it is so important to our families, on top of that, it is their voices that are leading, that this is First Nations, Zanatkas led. Throughout the year, we just relaunched the campaign last year, and during this pandemic, it's obviously shaped and changed how things work, but it's been such an amazing year. On the ground, we've had amazing community events, and this just shows like everything, the reason why we do what we do are beautiful, staunch, powerful communities that are resilient, and that no matter what, regardless of the hardships that we go through, we're standing up to protect our island homes. And yeah, just wanna, yeah, that's what it looks like and feels for me. I got into the climate space because my homelands is everything to me, and it is so important that we protect it for our elders, ourselves, and our next generations to come. Yeah.
Thanks, Vanika. And I saw on social media that you have done some pretty cool things recently with Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company. Do you want to share just briefly about that and what that looked like?
Yo, thanks, Mary. So we are trying to get the local, the Leichhardt MP Warren Inch, Mr. Warren Inch, to be a champion for the campaign. A way that we have been trying to get his attention is I recently went to Cairns, and with the support of Ben & Jerry's, we delivered him a custom pint with the image of the Torres Strait 8 and a message saying, "Warren, will you meet with Kebe, one of the claimants on Warrabeh, which is an island in the Kalkagal Nation of the Torres Straits." And something I love about this campaign is that we use art in different ways to share the message and the stories. So it was really cool to have an ice cream, definitely a creative and different way. I love just how innovative and different the climate space can be for everybody. And that was just a example of how we could make a serious matter a bit fun and sweet, if you will. But yeah, I definitely I love the art and how we can just use that as a storytelling way to amplify what's going on at home. Yeah.
So cool, Vanika. And I think this we just previously heard from two awesome First Nations leaders, Uncle Monty and Alicia, and they were talking about storytelling as well and how they use that to connect to culture and advocate for change as well. So it's really glad to see that there's parallels between the climate movement and also the movement for First Nations justice. It's also really interesting, to hear the different ways that you guys are advocating for climate justice. We're so used to seeing the massive protests that are happening on the street, and we know that's not for everyone. And so you guys are finding some cool and innovative ways to still speak up, speak out, and you move at the beat of your own drum. You create the space that you want in the way that you want, in whatever way that is meaningful to in your community. And I think that's a huge lesson that we can take in terms of advocacy and how we can do it our way, and that can still be right. So I guess that leads me to our next question, because the advocacy space is a little bit hectic, for a better word. And what are some of the challenges you've both faced in your advocacy journey, especially as Indigenous people from the Pacific? What has been your experience, and what are some of the challenges that you've had to face?
Definitely for a challenge that we faced is not just in the climate space, but in so-called Australia, Torres Strait Islanders have been historically excluded from the stories and just on knowledge of who we are as First Nations people of this land. And so that is reflected as well in the climate space of people being unaware of our island homes, and as well as that we are also in a climate crisis right now. There are more and more the climate change is coming to everybody's attention. Everyone's being more conscious about it and wanting to know how we can get involved and seek change. But within that, people are quick to see other places throughout the world which are experiencing the same as we are in Zenat-Kes. So a challenge that, it is a challenge having to have our voices heard, you know, our families that are at home and experiencing these things, a lot of the time are left out of the conversation. So that's why it's just so important, the work that we're doing to continue elevating that and pushing that we are in these larger conversations, and, you know, supporting one another in this space. Yeah.
Thanks, Wanaki. And yeah, hopefully through this, a lot more people here can learn about the Torres Strait and help you elevate and mobilize communities. What about you, Robus?
Thanks, Mary, and thank you, Wanaki. We do share very similar, I guess, limitations within our advocacy, the challenges and barriers that we face. I guess more specifically, operationally, resources is a big issue. Sometimes it can be a real big blockade in terms of limited funding for projects, or even if we were to outsource, I guess, community leaders or cultural practitioners to get them the appropriate remuneration or compensation for their stories, their experiences, their cultural knowledge, because that is invaluable. But yeah, and then even things like infrastructure, just having a dedicated space to work from, or even having a central hub. Here in Meanjin, it's so wide and expansive. Our team, especially, just everyone comes from everywhere, the north, the south, the west, the east of Meanjin. So just having a central hub itself would make things a lot easier as well. I guess another point is representation a lot of the times. It's very, what's the word? I guess more often than not, we don't see First Nations led and run campaigns unless we make them ourselves, unless we come up with them ourselves. A lot of the times, campaigns that are run, they tend to either lack consultation or co-design with, first of all, the First Nations people of this country. And then whether they're going to talk about the Pacific, you can tell sometimes that they haven't had proper consultation with someone of the Pacific. And it's just so palpable and easy for us to know that when they're talking about it, and us being from the Pacific, or even people who are Indigenous of this land, they just know. We know when you don't know what you're talking about. So, and that can cause a lot of frustration sometimes. But as well, I guess, within the community, language barriers for our elder community to hop on board with our campaigns can sometimes be an issue. Trying to make sure that our message is one that they can agree with, because at the end of the day, that's how we operate, is through our elders and through our respect for them, what they've done to pave the way for us to be here and for our families at home to thrive. So making sure that they can be on board with what we're doing, and as well as trying to relay what Australia is doing in terms of the climate crisis as well. But yeah.
Thanks, Wanaki and Robust. I think what I'm hearing, what I'm vibing is that we really need representation for better youth participation. I'm also a rhymer, what do you want to call it? And I love that you both touched on that, because, you know, it seems to be that the communities that are most affected aren't being given the platform or the space to lead and speak to their own experiences. You know, we don't need to be spoken for. And we often hear, you know, about passing the mic. So how can we make climate justice work more accessible to the cold community, to our multicultural community? I might chuck that one to Robust quickly, if that's okay.
Thanks, Mary. I think it really is just as simple as outreach. going into these communities, asking them what they want to see. A lot of the time, that's what's missing, is asking. We tend to come up with our solutions ourselves and think this is the best possible outcome. But sometimes, more often than not, it could be more damaging because you haven't listened to the communities that are affected. So that can be one simple thing that can be implemented, and making sure that they're also part of the conversation the entire time. Don't just consult and then, okay, this is cool, we come up with this idea, they'll love this. No, make them a part of the conversation the entire time. That's just one way I can think of.
So good, robust. Yes, definitely consultation and co-designing. So that means from the beginning to the end, 100%. And I might just close with one last question for the panel before we go to the Q&A in the chat. And I guess this is really good for those who are going to be pitching to our members of parliament tomorrow. What does real climate leadership look like? Wanaki?
Real climate leadership looks like just listening to the First Nations and Indigenous communities that are affected. We are the first scientists in the world. We have lived on our homelands for thousands and thousands of years. We know our country, and you need to listen to those. We know our land, and you need to ask us what needs to be done. So real climate leadership looks like First Nations led throughout worldwide, and that's where you'll see real grassroots. From a grassroots level, you'll see real change throughout the climate space.
Yes, Wanaki. Snaps for you, girl. All right, Rabathi, what about you?
Oh my gosh, I had tingles when she said first scientists of the world. Yes, that's so true. But yeah, I totally 100% agree with what Wanaki just mentioned. I think as well, we need real bold and drastic action. For the Pacific Climate Warriors Queensland team especially, our message has always been clear. True climate leadership looks like a just and fair transition to 100% renewable energy. And by just and fair, we mean those people and families that are currently in industries that exacerbate the climate crisis, such as fossil fuels. They need to be given suitable and equitable transitions for their livelihoods as well. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be affected as well. Those people who are in the coal industry and fossil fuels. Currently, the Pacific Climate Warriors are calling on global leaders to respond to the climate crisis through an intersectional lens that prioritizes justice, inclusivity, and a just world for ourselves and the future generations to come. And this is through our hashtag Youth for Pacific campaign. There are 7 overarching calls to action. I'm being mindful of time, so I won't go through all 7 of them, but I'm sure Mary or someone from the team can post them up somewhere for you guys.
Awesome. Wanaki and Rabathi, those demands are perfect, and you've communicated them so well for our team on the ground who'll be pitching to Parliament tomorrow. So in summary, it needs to be First Nations led. We need proper consultation, and climate change is affecting all of us. And in order for all of us to thrive and prosper, we need to make sure we have a just and fair transition for all. There's a few questions in the chat, and we probably only have time for 2. And also feel free to bounce between the both of you. This one is from Maria, and she asks, how do you navigate these conversations with youth within your Indigenous groups who are unaware of the climate justice and the effects on their homelands?
I might jump in. I love that question, Maria. I think with that conversation can go so many different ways, because youth have so many different influences, and they absorb media through so many different outlets. And I think really, if you're going to outreach to youth in whatever setting, it's really just meeting them where they're at. Don't try to overload them with all this information, all these different things, because sometimes that can do more damage. See where they're at, see where their knowledge is, and then ask them questions. What do you want to learn more about? And then see what gaps or what holes of knowledge you can fill. And then from there, I guess you could work together if they wish to continue their journey through that. But yeah, just hard and fast, that's what I would do.
Thanks, Rabas. And Vanika, I might put the next question to you, and this is from Western Australia. How do we highlight the intersectionality between immigration and climate change to communities with no awareness of how it affects them? It's a tough one, sorry, but I think a valid one too. So again, how do we highlight the intersectionality between immigration and climate change to communities with no awareness of how it affects them?
Wow, that's a really great question and a hard one. I think it just starts that climate change is something that affects everybody at different levels, but it matters to everybody. And yeah, I think just echoing what Robert said, just meeting people where they're at and starting this discussion and just starting to share and elevate those that are on the front lines about what is happening. And everyone will be at different levels, and it's just through beginning these conversations that we're able to learn more. And by listening to these communities, you know, it'll touch your heart, and then that's something that you can't ignore, that'll be there. But yeah, important stuff, and it just starts with beginning.
Thanks, Vanika. I know that was a really hard question, but what I'm hearing is, I guess, storytelling again, you know, how important that is in sharing and creating awareness, but in a way that's meaningful, right? We know sometimes climate change is all science and facts, but the real connection is stories. So thank you for that. Hopefully we have, yes, we do. One last question. We've got 5 minutes remaining. We've got here, how do we as young people connect racism and discrimination to climate change as a barrier? So I know we've talked a lot about, you know, protest privilege, you know, not everyone can jump out on the street and advocate for change in that way. There's certain, you know, safety parameters around that. So yes, that question's come from Rachel. How do we as young people connect racism and discrimination to climate change as a barrier?
Thank you, Mary. And so did you say that question was from Rachel? Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, tough question as well. But I think the first thing that came to mind for me was having conversations with one of my really good friends. I think it was on another panel as well, and they sort of shifted the way that I thought about that intersection between racism and climate change, is understanding, without being too radical, but maybe it's good as well, is that understanding that white supremacy is really the root of a lot of issues that us as minorities and us as immigrants and us as people of color face these days. And understanding that being the underlying issue and perhaps even the top end issue of some things, and addressing that can have a trickle down effect to all these different issues, including climate change and a lot of different racial barriers as well. I hope that answers the question, but yeah, I mean, that could be a topic that has its own panel itself.
Thanks, Rabas. Any words from you, Vanika?
Yeah, just echoing Rabas's comments. And for those that, just pass the mic. I think that's also what I just wanted to add. Yeah, pass the mic to those that need to be leading this space and need to have their stories told and heard.
Awesome. You guys have been so great. Our delegates are patiently awaiting lunch, so I won't keep them too much longer because we all know how important food is, right? So first, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing space with us, for sharing and gifting us your stories, your lived realities. I know this topic hits close to home, so thank you for being vulnerable, for leaning into your vulnerability, and for, I guess, also educating us. And we hope through social media, whatever avenue it is, that we can support and stand in solidarity with you and the campaigns that you're currently on. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch to do some more amazing work in the space.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you so much to the organizers as well.
Thanks. Thank you all. What we might try is, I know this, look, guys, I know this might be a bit difficult. Could I please get all the Yan members to unmute their laptops, and we'll try to do a huge round of applause for our guest, if we can do that. Perfect. Thank you so much again, Vanika and Rabathi, for all your sharing your insights and your knowledge. We can definitely feel how it is very close to your home, and thank you so much for sharing with this today. So I don't want to hold up the delegates for too long, but we are about to go into lunch. And it's going to be a half an hour lunch. We'll be back at 2 p.m. But can I just say, when you guys had your last break, look, I'm from home. There's a few other online delegates, and look, you guys are all mingling, eating your foods, and look, it did make me feel a bit left out. And I just want to say a massive welcome and a massive congratulations to all the young people online who are joining us. Jasmina, Rabi, Genevieve, Kankinsu, and Rumisia, who are online, because I know it's difficult to see all these other people in their states mingling, but just so you guys are amazing for being here today. So if any of the other online delegates, if you're here, feel free to use a Jamboard, and please write a good comment for all the online participants. So we're going to go to kick off into lunch, and we'll be right back at 2 p.m. sharp. Thank you so much again. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully everyone had a good lunch. I know after having some lunch, everyone is a bit slow. Your stomach is full and you do get that brain fog, but hopefully you guys had some good food. We got to mingle a little bit and got to make some new connections. Now, I'm very, very excited for our next panel, which I think is very important in the times that we live in now. I think it's conversations that we need to be having now and even continuing in the future more and more. I would like to welcome panelists for the next panel, which is about mental health. I would firstly like to welcome Vanika Malawapi. Please forgive me if I pronounce any of your names incorrectly. Vanika Malawapi is a senior policy and program specialist with a strong track record in the briefing and policy advice. Vanika has managed and shaped complex qualitative and quantitative projects encountering violent extremism for the New South Wales government. Notably, she established the New South Wales Compact Alliance for the Premier and Multicultural New South Wales. Vanika was born and raised on Daru country. So welcome to you, Vanika. Perfect. I'd like to welcome our next panelist, Daisy Mann, who is the founder of the Australian Digital Job Accelerator, which equips young people with the skills to get digital work. She's also the founder of Australian South Asian Centre, which is a membership-based community for ambitious South Asian women. Daisy leads the Deakin University's entrepreneurship program, Spark Deakin. So welcome to you, Daisy. Perfect. And I'd like to welcome our third panelist, Zinab Al-Hilali. Zinab is a leader, storyteller, and mental health and youth advocate. Over the last few years, Zinab led the Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network of WA, where she used her role to empower multicultural young people through advocacy, policy, and leadership. And I'd like to also welcome our facilitator from South Australia, the Youth Ambassador, Chancelin. And just a bit of a background to all our panelists. When you're introducing yourself, could you please give us a visual description? To give you an example, I'm brown man of Indian descent. I have a shaved head, a light beard, and I'm wearing a white top. And my pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently on Wadawurrung and Boonwurrung lands. If you don't know your traditional lands, that's perfectly okay as well. And I'll pass it over to our facilitator.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kana. Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. We've had some awesome discussions, and I hope that we can continue to find this very informative and engaging. It's so empowering when we can all just come together and talk about issues that are impacting our parts of the world and find solutions for them. So I'm really, I feel like we should be really lucky to be in this space right now. So my name is Chancelin. My pronoun is she, her. I'm calling in from Kona land within Adelaide. My visual descriptions are I'm of an African background. I've got dark skin, black hair with braids, and I'm wearing a green t-shirt. So let's jump right into it. We're going to be talking about mental health at the moment. And this is a topic that's very taboo and rarely spoken about within most, cultures outside of the Western society. And it's one that's very close to my heart as well, simply because it's, not something I grew up talking about rarely. So we'll just jump right into the first question. Can you tell us about your lived experiences of mental health and and how they have informed the work that you do. We can start with Anukina. Please, I do apologize if I've pronounced your name wrong.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Anukina. I'm dialing in from Darug country, also known as Sydney, New South Wales. I want to pay my respects to Darug elders and country and extend that respect to all of you. My pronouns are she, her. And so I have the privilege of being identified as a female from birth. My visual description is I'm a black-haired person. And in fact, this is even how my ancestors used to call us, the race of the black-haired people. And I'm wearing my jet black hair in a ponytail. I have brown eyes surrounded by big black frames. And I'm wearing really dark, mysterious lipstick and a black blazer. So that's a little bit about me. Do you want me to answer the question, or are we just introducing ourselves, Chanceline?
Maybe we can introduce yourselves and then I'll ask the question again.
Cool. So check.
Awesome. I can go next. I'm Daisy, and I'm calling in from the Wurundjeri people, Boomwurrung's land here in my parents' house in Cranbourne. It's east of Melbourne. I have short black hair. I'm of Indian Punjabi descent, and I'm wearing a rainbow top. Yeah, that's my visual description.
Beautiful. And Zinab?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zinab. I use she, her pronouns. I'm speaking on Wajak Noongar country here in Boorloo, Perth, WA. For my visual description, I'm a visible Muslim woman of Palestinian Iraqi background in my 20s. I'm wearing a pink hijab, headscarf, black jumper, and have a white clear background. Thank you.
Beautiful. It's a pleasure to meet you all, and I'm really excited to hear more about what you've got to say on this topic. So the question was, can you tell us a bit about your lived experiences of mental health and how they have informed the work that you do? Feel free to just jump right in.
I'm happy to go. I'm happy to go first. I think one of my pivotal moments was when I was 19 years old, and prior to this, I don't think I thought a lot about mental health from the lens of mental health. I think I'd gone through a lot of experiences. I don't think I had the vocabulary for it, but when I was 19, I really hit rock bottom. For context, I'm 27 now. And I was, I think, second year uni, and I just became a complete recluse and just decided to stay in my room, not go anywhere, which is very out of character for me, because I used to be, still am very chatty, always out there talking to people. And this experience for me was, I felt very, very unlike myself. And that was kind of, after, I think it went on for months, and I didn't know what to do. And it was very difficult. I didn't speak to my family about it very much because it wasn't something that they didn't really understand. So I just kept to myself about it. And then I ended up running off to the Himalayas in India and finding myself through sort of meditation. But since then, I guess what I've learned about the journey is I'll continue to have highs and lows. There'll be periods where I have lots of energy and periods where I feel completely depleted. And to just remember that these things aren't permanent, that they fluctuate, that you can't always be happy no matter what Instagram looks like, that there's going to be periods of sadness. And I like to, I guess, liken those to seasons that trees go through. So I guess you have multiple seasons where they shed their leaves, and then, spring comes and the leaves grow back. And the older I get now, the more understanding and patience I have with myself. But I guess when I was younger, I was very impatient and frustrated. And I think that caused a lot of suffering, because it's one thing to feel sad and to feel really depressed, And then there's another layer of the voice inside that judges you for feeling that way. So now I've gotten a bit better at just being like, okay, I feel sad today. That's fine. I'm going to work on ways to deal with that. I need to pretend to be happy. Maybe this will pass in a week. Maybe it'll pass in 2 months. Who knows? But it's okay. But before, even recently, earlier this year, I had a low again, and it was hard again because the second voice was like, oh, you're not good enough. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you productive? Why aren't you, because I have volunteers and I have staff and I have, team. And I just felt really bad for not being able to meet the expectations that I had set for myself, and therefore for them in my mind, to be inspiring, to help lead them, to help support them. But now I've learned to slowly separate those two, which has helped me explore pain and suffering in different ways. I'm happy to pass over to Anukina if you want.
Thank you. I have so much to say on this subject, so I'll try and keep it brief. Mental health, I always relate to wellness. And for me, as a person of colour, as a displaced Indigenous person, and as a neurodiverse person, I've always struggled to be in mainstream environments. And like Daisy, I never had the language or the narrative to describe my experience. And if anything, it was like always shame-based. And I always thought, is it me that just can't cope with sensory overstimulation, being in environments that were never felt good? Over the years, I started off actually as an English teacher, supporting refugee and migrant people grapple with language. And pretty soon I became a teacher in the Montessori method, which is actually like an alternative method. And that was one of my primary inspirations before I got into youth work. About how we need to create spaces for people that are safe and that you can move your body when you need to, that you can rest and sleep and eat and do what you need to do when you need to. And it's funny, Montessori happened 100 years ago, and we still haven't still actually taboo in a professional environment, whether at school or at work, to move your body, eat or rest, or disclose that you need certain adjustments to be made. The other big thing about mental health and wellness for me is about cultural safety. So in the last few years, one thing I've been really interested in and writing a lot of policy positions about is for communities of culture, for racialized bodies, for bodies with disability, feeling culturally safe. It's not enough to just feel physically okay. I also need to feel in a space culturally allowed to bring everything that I need to bring so that I can participate fully. And, I finally found a language to get my head around why I never felt good. And that language actually came from Aboriginal intellectual labour. So the people who have defined cultural safety are actually First Nations Australians, who are leading the way in actually intergenerational trauma for particular people comes out in these kinds of ways. And this is why you're not coping in certain environments. It's not always because you have a quote unquote mental health issue. So a lot of young people that I've worked with over the years, they're in aftercare. They've been in and out of mental health institutions. They have a mental health care plan. They have accessed medication and support they need. But guess what? They're still not feeling good. And so I've been really interested in, okay, how do we actually create social structures that are safe to make all bodies feel well, so that we can participate and do well at school and work?
Beautiful, thank you. And Zina?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess for me, with my lived experience in mental health, I grew up where mental health distress and illness were prevalent around me. It existed in my family with intergenerational trauma. I saw it in my community with depression and other mental health issues. And I saw a lot of my friends around me dealing with forms of traumas and mental illnesses. For me personally, dealing with intergenerational trauma was a major thing. I come from a family with a refugee father who had a traumatic experiences coming to Australia, as well as a migrant mother. Mental health wasn't really something that existed. The language didn't exist there. And so it was really difficult to identify it. I also grew up in a very multicultural area in WA that had a low socioeconomic background. And growing up there, there were limited mental health services, supports, resources available that were affordable, culturally sensitive and safe and accessible. So mental health support for me and others around me was unattainable, impossible, and just difficult. And these experiences impacted and informed my own advocacy and mental health journey in the multicultural space, because I grew up with no voices around me to help lead that way. So I wanted to become that advocate in my community. And so one of the projects that I've been working on is with Headspace National on the Visible Advocates Project. So basically, the Visible Project utilizes art and mental health to empower diverse young people, to connect them with an artist of their choosing to help represent their mental health journey. And the artwork can be in paintings, drawings, photography, any other way. So the artist who I've been able to work with is an amazing artist by the name of Asil Taya, a Palestinian artist based in Melbourne, who is utilizing the power of music, poetry, and song to portray the feelings of cultural mental health, my journey. And it's a true contrast of the power that culture plays in our mental health journey and healing. So that's basically what I've been doing. I continue to utilize my own lived experience in places to encourage other people from my community to advocate for themselves and help others around them.
Beautiful, thank you. What I was hearing from mainly Anakuna and Daisy was that I guess in life we'll go through ups and downs, and it's a matter of, I guess, coming to a space where you can kind of maintain and be able to find ways to cope when you are in your down moments. I guess, Daisy, can you talk a little bit more about the South Asian women's wellness space? Why did you think that there was a need for it? Why did you establish it?
So last year, again, a lot of my projects to start from either a personal need of my own or some lived experience. There's very few things I try to dabble in where I don't have lived experience, because I like taking a very practical approach to things. So I had my own lived experience of some domestic violence, as well as just growing up in a pretty tough household. So I left home when I was probably the first time actually was 16, and I moved in with my sister, and then I moved back home for about six to 12 months after that when I was 18, and then at 19 I moved out for good, and I haven't really lived at home, although I'm visiting today. And so I'd grown up with a pretty rough upbringing at times. It wasn't always like that. Like, there were a few incidents now that I look back, but it was, there were good parts too, which I have to mention. So having come out of that more than like a decade ago almost, I found myself, after 5 years of working, I kind of found myself in a position to want to help others. And it just started quite organically. One girl reached out to me during lockdown, and she was about 25, going through a really tough time. She'd been married kind of more to her parents' pressure. Like her parents wanted her to get married. She was dating someone, and then they just ended up married, you know, because she had to marry ASAP as soon as they found out she had a boyfriend. So, and then, you know, that relationship ended up being quite abusive. And then so she just got in touch with me. I didn't know her on Facebook, but I saw we had a few mutual friends. And I didn't know what to say. So I said, why don't you just come stay with me for a bit? And I booked an Airbnb during lockdown for her and myself to stay for a few days. And she stayed with me and just for a few days to get a bit of an escape. And then she, you know, decided to go back home, which a lot of people do. And then another person reached out to me, and then another person. And my response was, you know, I could point them to sort of hotlines, but as far as I know, a lot of these women will not contact hotlines. They don't see themselves as victims. They also don't label, hey, I'm going through domestic violence. They just say, I'm in this situation. And I read about you and you shared your story, because I shared my story quite publicly a while ago on LinkedIn. And it was probably the first time they'd seen someone younger, brown, South Asian, Punjabi that they could relate to and their experience. So they felt comfortable reaching out to someone. It was really interesting. A lot of the girls that reached out to me hadn't even told their best friends or their sisters or their brothers. They've told no one, even though their relationships with those family members might be good. And it takes me back to my experience of when I did go through some like physical abuse. I didn't tell my best friend at all until a decade later as well. So I think it's about, in our communities, we want to save face. We don't want to feel shame, and we definitely don't want to feel like victims. So it's harder to speak up because you do get labeled, and nobody wants to be labeled that way. So I started Soul House, really, it was my own personal experience, but then a few girls had gotten in touch, and then more kept getting in touch. And then I thought, well, why don't I just rent out this house for 6 months? And like, I mean, I don't recommend this, but I pulled out my superannuation. And so I paid for it for 6 months in advance out of my superannuation. And I said to myself, I'll fundraise. And if I'm able to fundraise to cover the cost, great. If I'm not, I'm at peace with that as well. And I was able to fundraise and cover most, like $15,000 from fundraising. And this is like from sending direct messages on LinkedIn to hundreds of people. Fundraising is very difficult. It's not easy. It's not as simple as like, I remember I had a post I shared, and that post reached 300,000 people. But can you believe it? 300,000 people, how many donors did we have? We had 6, and we had less than like $1,000. So what young people, and you know what I got confused is that, oh, if I get exposure, if I get media, the donations will go up. No, donations go up when you individually, one by one, ask people, I realized. But that was the purpose of kind of Soul House, to create a space where South Asian women and allies and women of color could come and be in a space where it's kind of a loving, kind environment. You didn't have to be going through DV. You could have gone through it 10 years ago, 5 years ago. But it just so happened that probably almost like everyone that came and stayed had been through or was going through some sort of domestic violence. And it was out in Belgrave, and we had it operating for about 7-8 months in the end, and then we had to sort of wrap it up. But that was the intention behind it, and it was just a life-changing experience to be able to do that for others.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. It's so important for us to kind of recognize the different cultures of mental health. And I've found that a lot of the times, if me being an African woman, I would be more comfortable to go to a mental health program that has someone of my own background. And so it's a struggle within, I guess, for people with cold communities to be able to access these facilities when there's no representation there. With that being said, what are the pressing issues concerning mental health for multicultural youth? So have you observed anything, I guess, from participants within your field of work? And anyone can take the floor.
I guess I can start. Well, for the work that I've done and also my own lived experience, for a lot of multicultural young people, getting mental health support is very difficult. There's a lot of factors that I've seen. So things like shame, guilt, stigma when discussing mental illness within your community. is a major factor. Many multicultural young people, especially from migrant and refugee backgrounds, might feel guilt when experiencing mental health illnesses and distress when your family has gone through really tough traumas such as war, poverty, abuse, and there's a fear of being labelled as ungrateful or just as that's just a minor thing. And there's also in Australia just a lack of mental health literacy. Like in Australia in general, there's a lack of literacy as it is, but you can imagine that this can be more difficult for multicultural communities where services and supports are not available. There's language barriers, there's stigma, there's not a lot of mental health workers from your own background. So to help support the community. But also I think that one of the other major issues I'm seeing a lot is with the young people who I've worked with is a lot are experiencing negative experiences when seeking mental health support, whether it's racism, sexism, classism, being not listened to, not having their culture acknowledged. In my personal experience, a lot of services and programs aren't trauma-informed and culturally sensitive and safe. And it's more than just having a compulsory training session that you do to make you competent. It's about having empathy and understanding the role that identity, culture, background, social factors have to people's mental health. And our cultures play an important role in that healing process that a lot of mental health services ignore. And I think that's a major factor in terms of like the lack of diversity in that mental health space.
Yeah, Anna Kuna, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I love what everyone's saying, so I'm not going to like continue that. You know, one thing that I've sort of discovered as well, being in a lot of mainstream and, you know, culturally specific spaces, is mental health in Australia anyway so far is the end extreme of crisis. And for a lot of us, whether young or old, whether mentally literate or not, we don't even know how to self-assess. So one thing I noticed over the years is when you ask people, how are you? That's actually a really deep question for people who come from this survival culture. And we often don't think that we're in survival mode. We just think, you know, we're a normal, successful, young achiever. We're so amazing, and we probably are. But actually even learning how to understand our own self and our own energy, and when we actually need to ask for support, just isn't available. So a lot of the work that I do is actually help people self-assess and using different models, different very practical tools that resource people to start tracking how you're going every day, so that you don't wait until things are extremely bad to then send a Facebook message or, you know, reach out to someone. So I'm sort of interested in, you know, how can we sort of make self-reflection and self-assessment mainstream so that we don't end up in crisis, and we can sort of maybe prevent some of this stuff. And look, this stuff is really complicated. What are the issues for young people? Well, you all know what the issues are because you are actually young people. But a lot of the issues are bigger than just our mental health. They're about our housing, our employment, our body image stuff. You know, there's so many bits to feeling healthy that come into this story. And so, yeah, the work that I've done with Elemental Training, which is, you know, a little sort of workshop space that I designed, is to start making this normalized, start making check-ins and self-assessments a daily practice so that we can all sort of, you know how we are going.
Beautiful. Anna Kuna, are you able to just expand on that and just, I guess, how can we draw from our own cultures for healing? What roles do you think that our cultural communities have within our mental health?
Yeah, look, I love that question. That's a great question. Our own cultures, so many of us, we are actually very displaced from our cultures. Multiculturalism tells us we are cultural people, but when you actually ask us, like, who are you? What's your story? What's your traditions? We might be able to say a few things, but some of us don't actually know or have the privilege of knowing that because our family was stuck in maybe survival mode, and some of us actually were displaced from our families. So a lot of the work that I've been doing in the past few years, and that's actually alongside Mayan New South Wales, and I see them here, so hello. I can't actually make out faces, so I don't know who's in that room. We actually started doing a process of intercultural collaboration, and that was led by First Nations people. So one thing we were learning about culture and drawing from our culture is our actual cultural displacement itself is a wound, is an unnamed wound. It's a wound that a lot of us will not find the name for until much later in life. Some of us are very, open to that, especially if you've experienced displacement in this lifetime, it's quite obvious. For those who have intergenerational displacement, it becomes a bit harder to describe. And so one solution that we came up with was, can we create Indigenous cultural, what I call deep disclosure spaces that are not necessarily therapeutic or clinical in nature. So when you're in a mental health crisis or things are tough, you've actually got to go into the system on a level, right? And for a lot of us, maybe we're not ready for the system, maybe we had a bad experience, etc. And so creating what we call deep disclosure spaces, which are culturally safe spaces led by cultural caretakers. So not only elders, like I think that a lot of us are very disconnected from elders, and some of our elders are really old and really tired. So there's this new word that I've come up with a few of my First Nations colleagues called cultural caretakers. People who have a level of knowledge of what culture is about, who create spaces where we can sit and talk about what's going on without actually getting a response or getting a solution, but just so that we can meet and gather regularly. And the feedback we got from that was astounding. Young people found it incredibly healing to sit in Indigenous-led spaces where it was just active listening, no one spoke back, you weren't stigmatized, but there was a level of connection to country and to each other and understanding ourselves. So that was one solution. And again, that's in the prevention space. That's the work that I do is in the before you get to needing a professional intervention, because a lot of us are constantly in that space without realizing it. And then with young people, what we're realizing is that we get to a high crisis level and then you get a bunch of interventions that can be quite scary and quite, what's the word, re-traumatizing for young people. And so our platform is, can we do a bunch of work before young people actually get to the high level crisis? So I hope that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I guess it's without doubt that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We've just got less than 10 minutes, and I might open up this final question to everyone. What tangible actions or solutions need to be implemented now in order to support multicultural young people's mental health? Maybe we'll start with Daisy.
I want to, I guess, share a few things. One is just from participants attending today, I think one really powerful thing you can do, and there's no pressure to do it, but is I found when I opened up about my own story in a way that I was comfortable to do so, so many people reached out to me. So I think that's really powerful, because on one hand, we've become a society that says, oh, mental health awareness, we're at Purple Day, Suicide Awareness Day, Yellow Day, and we've got all these days, right? And on another hand, we're still a society that shame people for sharing mental health stories at times. So when you feel confident and you can, claim that that's your story, and that's what I've done, and share it in a way that is, resonates with people, it makes a huge difference. Like, there's one thing to say, oh, it's Mental Health Awareness Day, I really care about mental health, versus, hey, I went through this really tough time, and I saw a therapist, and this and this and this and this helped me, with some resolution. It's quite inspiring for other people, but it's also, that's what actually normalizes something. When we talk about normalizing mental health, I don't think we're going to get there from just talking abstractly about mental health. While, if you have a look, I grew up with my father had bipolar, so I used to organize a lot of his medicines as a child, and I've watched him come in and out of home, and just growing up was very, very unstable with him. But when I look at, like, lately, some celebrity figures like Kanye West has bipolar, and I look at the way society treats him, like, oh, he did that because he's crazy, he ran for presidency because he's crazy, because he's bipolar, right? And it makes me feel like, wow, we're still at a place where we don't know how to talk about specific illnesses, and also to judge people that way. And I think that's, I've become more and more aware of that with that kind of lived experience of having, like, a father like that. But yeah, I think from that perspective, one is, like, sharing lived experiences is huge. Again, there's not pressure to make you feel super vulnerable. You share it and then you feel like, oh, what have I done? So you got to be at a place where you're quite confident in yourself, right? That's really important. When I shared it, I knew thousands of people would see it, and I was fine with it. And I knew my parents may never want to talk to me again, or they may not talk to me for a year, and I was fine with that. And they didn't talk to me again for another 6 months recently. So I think you got to get really comfortable with the implications of sharing. If you're not, then don't. But I think that's what's going to move us forward. In terms of these spaces, obviously having more people working with lived experience is just a basic. I really struggled even to date to find a South Asian therapist that I can go to. And I remember calling up, like, I work at a university, and they've got an employee assistance program, which is you get that when you work somewhere, usually to get 10 sessions, or if not 20 a year. And I said, hey, do you have any South Asian therapists? And they're like, no, we don't really collect that data. And then I was like, and then I spoke to a friend. She goes, no, Daisy, you got to call them and say, do you have a therapist that speaks Hindi? And so I called them, like, do you have a therapist that speaks Hindi? I don't really speak Hindi, I speak Punjabi. I said Hindi or Punjabi. And they're like, oh, do you need a translator? We can get you a translator. It's like, I don't need a translator. I'm looking for something, and it was just so hard. And then finally they said, oh, we do collect language data. Here we go. But again, I didn't really gel with that particular therapist. So, and the list of, like, therapists that have a South Asian background who understand cultural issues is quite limited. It's quite a small list of people. So I think one thing is finding and encouraging more diverse people to enter those fields of, like, psychology and the arts and arts therapy and other alternative approaches. The third thing I'll just add is, I think, I know there's a clinical approach to mental health, and I'd like to see us, there's a place for that as well. But a lot of us are really, really lonely. I think a lot of my mental health problems have come from being extremely lonely. But, outwards, I'm a very confident person who has lots of friends. But I think deep down, because of the lack of kind of family structures for me, I was quite lonely in some ways. So I think sometimes with mental health, it's looking at the whole picture. Like, is the person going through DV? Are the person's parents extremely controlling and they can't be open with them? Have they been forced into a relationship? Are they just feeling really, really lonely? In that case, if someone's feeling really lonely, I don't think it's very helpful to say, hey, call a hotline, because you do call them, and I've called them, and after 20 minutes they say, we can't talk to you much longer. And you're like, oh, well, that felt a bit transactional. So I think it's like, checking in with people in a way that you would with your friends or your family, not in like a clinical-ish way, because then again, that people don't want to feel like they're on the receiving end of help. So how do you make it so it's friendly? I mean, those are, I think, just three kind of practical things, not really systemic things, but practical things I think we can all look at advocating for.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing that, Daisy. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Annika, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just had the answers to the questions in the chat, but I'm happy to type them in the chat if that makes our lives easier.
That would be much better. Thank you for that. Thank you. It's been a pleasure listening to all three of you. Thank you for coming on this platform and sharing some very insightful information with us, which will help us come up with some pitches.
Perfect. Thank you, Chancellor. And yes, I'm sorry about the time. We are a bit tight, but I think it tells that we definitely need more conversations on this, and there's plenty of questions that we do need to talk on this. Before we move on, I think let's try it again, delegates. Could we unmute ourselves and do a round of applause, if that is possible? Perfect. Thank you. I just want to say a massive thank you to Anukina, Zainab, and Daisy from our end. I know it's definitely not easy to share your lived experience. Many times it does get fatiguing, but just to let you know, we all respect and understand where you guys are coming from, and we thank you very much for sharing your experiences. And I'm sure the delegates, all 50 of them here, will have taken something away and can implement for the future and in their pitches. Thank you so much. Team, we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll be back for our next presentation at sharply 2:45. Thank you once again. Team, welcome back after that short, sharp break. And now we're moving on to our last presentation for today, which I'm personally very excited for. It is a presentation from the SBS by Mike Clay. Let me introduce you to Mike Clay. He is the executive producer of Current Affairs and the comedy show The Feed, where he led a data-driven strategic transformation that doubled ratings, boosted digital audiences by 10 times, and won 10 major awards in 3 years. He is a journalist with over 10 years of experience, and Mike will graduate with an executive MBA in 2022. And I'll throw it over to Mike, but just to let you know, we are going to have a 10-minute Q&A at the end, so feel free to pop in questions in the chat and we'll get to that. And Mike Clay, just as a bit of an introduction for all our speakers, we're doing visual description of what you're looking like, whatever you feel comfortable with, your pronouns, and what traditional lands you're on, if you do know that. And I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Wonderful. 2 seconds. Let me just share my screen.
Good.
Are you guys seeing that? You're seeing Pitching Stories Media? Yeah, great. So sorry, I'm just trying to get my, yeah, let's do it like that. So yes, look, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So hi, my name is Mike. I'm a man in my mid-30s. I've got slightly olive skin and brown hair, brown eyes, and just a hint of stubble because it's the weekend. Yeah, there will be a lot of time for questions at the end. So please, like, if you want to ask something, keep it, because there'll be lots of time for questions at the end. Put it in the chat if you want, or you can just jump in at the end. Also, I will send around the slides to the organisers afterwards, so don't feel like you have to furiously type notes, but yeah, that's up to you. So I didn't know you were going to read the bio. I feel a little bit embarrassed. I also started with a little bit about me, so maybe I'll just, this will be again. So I've been a journalist more than 10 years. I've worked across ABC News, Network 10 and SBS. So I'm usually the producer rather than the reporter, which means if I'm doing my job right, you should only ever see my handiwork and never see me. The shows I produced for would be ABC News, The Project on Network 10, The Drum on ABC TV, and for the past 5 years, I've been producing The Feed on SBS TV and digital platforms. I came into the show as the supervising producer, which is basically the second in charge. And after about a year and a half, I became the executive producer. Outside of my work as a journalist, I've studied documentary. I've got a Master's of Development Studies. And for a while, I thought I might not do media and instead work in social development, because that's an interest area of mine. As was mentioned, I'm partway through an MBA, which I'll finish next year. And I have 2 boys, aged 2 and 4. So it's a busy life in my neck of the woods. A little bit about The Feed for those who don't know, which, considering this is a youth Advocacy Network, most people probably don't watch television. So you may not know, but there's this thing called television. The Feed is a current affairs and comedy show on television on SBS. It's currently a 30-minute show that airs once a week on Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. Although the show has had a few different lives over the 8 years that it's been on air. Our audience is actually pretty broad for what's often thought of as a youth show. So on broadcast, we have a mostly older audience, and we've got a mostly younger audience on digital. 70% of our broadcast audience, 70, are over 55, okay? Whereas nearly 85% of the Feed's Facebook fans are under 55. So what that means is we're providing a youth perspective on the world to a broad audience. And we do that by combining documentary, current affairs, explainers, interviews, comedy. But I think the thing that really sets the show apart from most things on television at the moment is that we are a talent escalator. We're a training ground for young, diverse content makers. So generations of journalists, producers, comedians have and will go on to really successful careers in television, producing and presenting some of Australia's biggest and most creative shows. And in that, like, it really demonstrates that actually age is no barrier to ambition or excellence, which I think is something that you would all know in your hearts and your minds. The Feed has won 9 Walkley Awards in the past 3 years and an Augie Award for sketch comedy. The average age of the Feed staff is actually just 32, and most of the team are in their 20s. So we're a very young team working together to kind of innovate and experiment. Our mission, and this is a mission that the team themselves came up with at the beginning of 2020. We had a series of workshops, and we decided that our mission was to inspire a deeper understanding of life in Australia in all its diversity, with content that challenges, surprises, and entertains. And so, you know, by way of example, I think in the last year or so, we've covered the following issues. The Queensland crackdown on repeat youth offenders that unfairly targets young Aboriginal people, the growing issue of concussion injuries in female sport, which is largely being ignored, the Chinese medicine made from donkey skin and the Australian farmers looking to cash in on it, the call for a ban on rock climbing on Aboriginal sacred sites, discrimination in health services against LGBTQIA+ Australians, to name just a few. I think the other thing to know about the show is that even when we don't focus on issues that particularly affect people from diverse backgrounds, we always try and feature diverse voices as experts, case studies, or on-screen talent. And in terms of, and that kind of extends to who makes the show as well. So SBS recently surveyed its staff for diversity and inclusion purposes. And we found that the Feed staff are pretty evenly split, so 50-50 in terms of gender representation. Bit over 6% of the team identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, 44% come from a culturally diverse background, 31% identify as people of colour, 6% have disability, and 12.5% identify as LGBTQIA+, 30% were born overseas. So I think that's really important as well in terms of being able to tell stories authentically. But I'm not really here to talk about myself or my show, but that does give me a grounding to, and some expertise in talking about what I did come here to talk about, which is pitching to media. I want to frame this conversation first with a series of don'ts, and then with a series of do's. The don'ts are about, I guess, let's call them common mistakes that I see from activists or publicists or other communications and public relations teams when pitching to media. Mistake number one. Mistake number one is asking, what story do I want to tell, I the activist or I the publicist, instead of what story do audiences want to hear? Okay, You always need to put the audience first, because this is actually what the journalist you're speaking to will be doing when they decide whether your story is worth telling. Okay, so what does putting the audience first mean? It means considering what they'll get out of your story. So what is the payoff for the audience? What will they walk away with? Will it change them emotionally? Will it inspire them or empower them? Will they be informed? And is it about something that they naturally want to be informed about? Or do you have to work extra hard to convince them that they need to be informed about this? Will they get, I don't know, an interesting anecdote to tell their friends about when they see them next? Putting the audience first also means considering the audience of the publication that you're pitching to, okay? So don't assume that all audiences are the same, they are not. A story pitched to the Australian Financial Review is going to be different to a story pitched to Sun Herald because they have different audiences. A story pitched to Channel 10 will be different to a story pitched to ABC. So if you're pitching to media, the first thing to ask yourself really is like, who do you want to convince? Who do you want to reach, okay? If you're pitching, let's say, as an example, a story about a diversity issue, maybe like a rise in racist attacks against people of Asian descent. Now, it might be pretty easy to get coverage on that issue somewhere like SBS, but you're also likely to be preaching to the converted there. You know, SBS audiences already care about diversity issues. They already care about those sorts of things. They're engaged in those issues. That doesn't mean that you ignore SBS, of course, but it does mean that you need to have a clear strategy for who you're approaching and why. If you wanted to mobilize your base, then a story on SBS will do that. If you wanted to reach new audiences, then maybe going outside the kind of existing supporter bubble is a better strategy. You know, would you be better to get your story into the Daily Telegraph or News Corp press, you know, where you aren't preaching to the converted? There are no right answers. It will depend on your strategy and what you're trying to do. But it is really about, you know, being considered and thinking about the audience that you want to reach, because that will then determine who you talk to in the press. Mistake number 2, foregrounding the issue instead of the people it affects. So often I'll get a pitch and it's like, this is a really important issue. Can I tell you about the issue, the issue, the issue, the issue? But the thing is, good stories are about people, not issues. And I really can't stress that one enough. So as a journalist and a storyteller and a content maker, what I need is for you to find me people, not facts. So you need to come with case studies. As a journalist, I need people affected by the issue who can speak well, who feel deeply about the issue and have some sort of direct connection to it. They need to have experienced it firsthand. And that's because good stories are about emotion, not information, actually. So where is the drama, the emotion, the stakes in your story? What will it make the audience feel? This emotional component, rather than the informational component, is kind of particularly true for video and audio stories. Those are media that really foreground emotion. Emotion is the glue that holds attention on those media. And good stories make the audience care, okay? So how do you make the audience care about your story? Well, there are a few different ways. Common ones are, this affects you. That's a very common one. This affects someone you know or love. Another common one. This will surprise you. Very common. This will make you feel something. Often anger. That one's probably used a little too much nowadays. But what's missing there in that short list, and there are other options, but what's missing there, at no point did I say, this is important. Because audiences don't actually care if something is important, because important is not an objective measure. What's important to you is not necessarily what's important to me or to your mum or your neighbour or your friend at school. So just coming and saying this is an important issue is not enough to make an audience care. You need to rely on some of those other things, like this affects you, this affects someone you know or love, this is, you know, and if it doesn't affect someone you know or love, then I'm going to introduce you to someone who you are going to love because they have a personal story and connection to the issue. And because it affects them, you will then care about this issue. So that's mistake number 2. Mistake number 3, ignoring the now, okay? The news needs to be one thing above all else, and the clue is in the name. That's right, the news needs to be new, okay? So what is it about your story that demands attention now instead of last month or next month or last year? This question of what's new is especially important for the kind of long-running, difficult, complex, perennial issues, things like climate change, refugee issues, or Indigenous issues. Like some of the most important intractable kind of issues that we haven't been able to solve in this country in particular for, you know, years, if not decades and generations. And yet they're the hardest issues to get traction for because they're so intractable. They've been around for so long, right? So the challenge, if you're pitching around kind of long-running or perennial issues, things like climate change, refugee issues, Indigenous issues in this country, is to find a way to make the issue relevant now, okay? So, for example, is the situation better or worse than 12 months ago? Was something promised by politicians or companies and then not delivered? Is there some new escalation in the problem that's happening now? Or is there a new solution that isn't being adopted? Are other jurisdictions trying something different that isn't happening in the jurisdiction that you're working in and doing your advocacy in? Is there an anniversary coming up that you can peg your story to? These are all kind of ways or lenses to try and make the old new, or to find the new in something that is kind of intractable and long running. So that's kind of mistake number 3. Mistake number 4 is divorcing your story from place, okay? So good stories have good pictures or places or events. And this is not just a television thing. This also holds for print, for radio, for photography. A story that can transport an audience to a place, that can evoke a place and time, will always do better than one that doesn't. So what does that mean for you? It means find a place. Situate your story in a place. If this is a national issue, find me the suburb or the town or the city where it is the worst or the best. It doesn't matter, but find me the place that we're going to set the issue in. Okay, so the town where people from the city have pushed up prices by so much as they've left those big cities that the original residents are now homeless and hungry. And this is the worst town that it's happened to, or it's happened the most in this particular town. That's a national story that's happening everywhere, but it's set in a particular place. So pay attention to place when pitching. Mistake number 5, and this is a biggie, trying to control the story or the messaging too much. Journalists hate this, okay? Making yourself the gatekeeper to your case studies, putting yourself in between the journalist and case study, or only providing access to your CEO or no one else. You know, these are all big no-nos because they are a blockage against good storytelling, and they will just frustrate and annoy the journalist. Now, what this might mean is you might get to control the message a bit more if you try and control things this time around. But then probably won't be a next time. That journalist will walk away from that story or that collaboration thinking, oh, I'm never going to work with so-and-so again. Like, they were very much not helpful and really just like tried to control that so much. Because I think ultimately pitching to media is about relationships. If you build up a good relationship with a journalist or an outlet, then over time, you will get more of your stories out to the public in a way that satisfies your goals. But in the short term, that may mean relinquishing more control over the story than you would otherwise feel comfortable doing. And some of that, but it will pay off over time, because you will build up that relationship, and that relationship will be built on trust and mutual respect. And so hopefully it will work in the long term. The other mistake that I often see is starting too late, or possibly not being aware of the deadlines or lead times that publications work to. So I work on a weekly current affairs show, a weekly show. What that means is my lead times are actually a fair bit longer than if you work on daily news. So too often I will get a call from an activist or a publicist saying, oh, would you like to come to this event tomorrow to do a story on X? And it's perfect for us. I mean, absolutely perfect for us. They haven't done any of the things that I've talked about, all of the mistakes. It's all great. It meets our audience needs and requirements perfectly. And yet I have to say, no, sorry, we can't make it. Why? Because I got the call today and the event is tomorrow. Now, I can't make that happen on my deadlines and my lead times because of our production cycle. You won't know what the production cycle for every single media outlet is, and nor should you be expected to. But so a general rule of thumb, I say, is that media need notice. The more notice, the better. So give them lots of notice and then lots of reminders. Because that way, you'll say, hey, there's this event coming up in a month. And then a week later, oh, there's this event coming up in 3 weeks. Oh, there's this event coming up in a fortnight. Oh, there's this event coming up in a... And the more notice you give and the more reminders you give, it means that you capture different media at different cycles of that production cycle. So those are the 6 most common mistakes that I see when pitching to media. Those are the don'ts. So what do the do's look like? So let's say you have an issue that you want to promote and get coverage for. What do you do? 6 steps, again. Hope that's not too small. But basically, step 1 is start early. Like, give yourself a lot of lead time. If you've only just realized that the anniversary of a major parliamentary inquiry that put forward a whole lot of recommendations to government 12 months ago, and tomorrow is the 12-month anniversary and nothing's being done. If you've only just realized today and the anniversary is tomorrow, it's too late. It's too late. You've missed that window, because you have a lot of legwork to do before you get to the point where you're pitching to media. So give yourself a lot of lead time. Step 2, have a strategy, okay? Don't just shotgun approach, spray everything everywhere and just hope that it lands. Think about who you want to talk to. Like, who are the audiences that you want to talk to? Which publications talk to those audiences? How will you approach those publications? Who do you know? What is the avenues open to? What do you think that publication wants? Like, what will satisfy their audience? Those are the sorts of questions that will inform the story that you then pitch, right? The third step is to find case studies, okay? So these are good, relatable people who can speak powerfully and emotionally about their own personal connection or experience of the issue. Probably this is not your CEO, research director, or policy analyst. Probably that's not them. It's someone else. So find case studies, because that'll be the first question that they ask. Who have you got to talk to? Who have you got? Who can you put up? Step 4, find and sell the new. What is new about your issue? Can you package up, if your issue is not new, can you package up a new element of it and sell that? Like I talked about before, you know, is there an anniversary coming up? Has something happened? Is there an escalation? Is there a new solution that could be adopted? All of those kind of questions and suggestions. Step 5, find and sell a place or an event. Is there something happening that TV cameras can come and film? If there isn't, can you manufacture something? Can you build something? Can you organize a thing that can be a place and an event that can be that evocative transportation for an audience into a world and an issue? And step 6 is really knock on every door. Like, the more calls you make to media, the more likely you are to get a yes. But also the no's are important and useful too, because you actually often learn more about what someone wants from a no than you do from a yes. Okay, so if you get a no, ask questions. What is it about this pitch that doesn't work for you? Have I not given you enough time? Is it not something that your audience cares about? You know, ask questions, because the answers to those questions will give you the better way to pitch next time around. That pretty much brings me to the end of my kind of quick do's and don'ts for pitching to media. But we do have time for questions though. So I'd like to kind of open it up. Feel free to kind of throw me anything and I'll answer in the best way that I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type in the chat, or if you would like, feel free to take yourself on mute and you can ask a question as well. And we only have a few minutes, so we might only have time for 1 or 2 questions, if anyone has any. Is someone from Maya and Victoria asking a question?
Hello, this is from Maya, New South Wales. I have a question, but it's not worded in my head enough yet, so it might just sound like word vomit. But you mentioned that at some stage we can't control the story that we're trying to pitch. You're talking with a group of like multicultural youth who are trying to talk on real issues that affect us. How do we navigate that space where we have to let go of the control of the story, but making sure that the outcome or the overall, I guess, story ends up fitting what we're aiming to say? Sorry, that sounds like...
Yeah, so what I heard there was, I think, you know, when I relinquish control, how can I trust that the journalist or storyteller will tell the story, will do justice to the story and won't burn me or do the wrong thing? And I think the answer to that question is like, have lengthy conversations with that journalist to understand what kind of story they think they want to tell, and what they think are the interesting parts of the story, who they want to talk to. You know, check in, don't act as gatekeeper to the case studies, but maybe check in with the case studies and be like, what sort of questions did they ask, or something like that. I think, you know, when you're talking to someone, you can, like, humans generally have a pretty good read on other people. Most times you can come away going, I don't trust that person. You know, ultimately it's about trust. And so if you're giving up control, it's got to be in a place of trust. And I think that only happens through kind of lengthy and repeated exposure to someone. Which is why I kind of also talked about relationships. You know, if you've successfully pitched to someone, and you know that they've done you good in the past, and they haven't, you know, mistreated your case studies, they haven't, you know, skewed things in a way that you didn't want or something like that, great. Then you know that you can trust them more in future. But I mean, sometimes it is, and you can also sometimes look at the outlet. Who do they work for? Do I trust them in that sense? You know, So yeah, it's and it's a tricky one. It's just, I think, you know, go with your gut feel on whether you trust that person, because as you say, yeah, you're putting up, you know, potentially sometimes vulnerable people in kind of from marginalized communities. So there does need to be an element of trust there.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. And we have 1 minute left, so we might sneak in a question from Multicultural Youth Queensland.
I just had a question. I had a question in regards to the audience. How do we find our audience, especially if it's something that, you know, not a lot of Australians know about or potentially don't want to hear about, or if someone comes from like a multicultural background, you know, a lot of the outlets out there are mainly just focused for white people, but then you do have some exceptions like SBS and other stuff. But have you wanted to reach someone who's not already preached to, like you said, how do we do that effectively when it's something that they don't want to hear?
If someone doesn't want to hear something, in my experience, there's very little you can do to make them hear something. You know, particularly with the kind of, I guess, algorithms and bubbles and audiences and niching of interests and things like that, you know, we do find that people stay in their interest groups, you know, they stay in their interest groups. So it's a challenge. I think, how would I approach that? Maybe, you know, if I was the content maker and I was going, okay, so let's take a cohort of people who traditionally audiences are not very trusting of, people who've done jail time. If you've done jail time in this country, most mainstream Australians, regardless of ethnicity, not very trusting of anyone who's done jail time, regardless of the reasons. So they already don't trust this person. What do I need to do to make them trust this person? I need to find the most lovely, relatable, just like, you know, down to earth, honest, like person that just, you know, the kind of person that you just want to love and trust, because already the audience is starting from a position of distrust. So it's really about finding, I guess, ambassadors for your issue or for that marginalized group, that are, you know, the heroes of that, you know, your hero that the audience can kind of fall in love with, and can kind of then relate to and go, oh, maybe I've changed my mind, or something like that. There's really, but if someone really doesn't want to hear it, there's not a lot you can do, unfortunately.
No
Sorry.
worries. Thank you so much for those comments, Mike. And we have unfortunately gone over time by 2 minutes. But again, I want to say a massive, massive thank you for coming and sharing your wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience. I think the do's and don'ts were very key. And I think when the delegates present to the high level decision makers tomorrow, I think they will hopefully implement some of the things that you've told them today. So as we've done the whole day today, delegates, could we please take each other really give a round of applause to Mike? Perfect. Thank you. And I would like to pass on to the National Manager of Mayan, Rana Ibrahimi, to do the closing remarks of today.
Thank you so much, Kano. Hi, everyone. Rana, I'm seeing you from the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I want to also pay my respect to all their elders, past and present, and extend this respect to all of the Aboriginal and Torres Islanders that we had today, and to your community's elders. Well, I'm totally overwhelmed with all amazing conversations. I think we had some extraordinary panels, some really, really good insights that I learned a lot actually myself, especially from the last session from Mike, because that's something that we need to do with changing the narrative. We need to try new things in policy and advocacy. And I think we could collect a lot of information today about that. you were the listeners mostly today. And thank you so much for the great questions that you had. I really looking forward to hear you tomorrow. And I hope you will have a really good session to workshop your pitches. And I think you have a lot of feed and food for thought. So you have the input. You just need to cook it well, and we will wait. And usually the next day food is more delicious than the current food. So I think tomorrow you will be all ready with the great pitch that we are going to listen. And I'm really excited that today went really well. I hope you have the same feeling. And I think right now the exciting part is going to start for you. So good luck with the pitch. And thank you so much. A special thank to Jan, who did an amazing job, and to Kono as well. We know what we have done. We are really happy with that. And also to amazing Mayan team with extraordinary work on the background. And we are still here. We will wait until you finish. And I think you're going to have a nice dinner tonight as well. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And just to wrap up for my today, again, absolutely amazing session today. We've had a panel about First Nations. We had an amazing panel about First Nations, climate change and mental health, all important topics. And just to let you guys know again, New South Wales and WA, you'll be working on climate change. Tasmania, you'll be working on First Nations rights. In Queensland, Victoria, and a special online group, you'll be working on mental health and racism. And how good was that presentation from Mike? And I'm very excited for all of you guys tomorrow. To give you a bit of a background, tomorrow you'll be presenting to very high level decision makers who are in government, who are in various roles. And I think it's an opportunity that doesn't come all the time. It is a very special opportunity. And I hope that you guys give your all and do a presentation that is different, unique, and that is what you want deep down, and you can present that to everyone else. And I just want you to know that you're sitting in those spots for a reason. You were picked for a reason to be in this conference, and just know that, you know, whatever you have to say does matter. So speak up, get your opinions heard, make sure you come to a consensus and do something different. You might not realize, but I've changed my shirt, flipped my watch, and changed the lights on the back because I want you guys to think a bit differently, innovate. We know some of the solutions that already exist. I want you guys to think differently, and I know you guys can do that and blow all the panelists tomorrow. Just to give you a bit of background, make sure you're not doing the same thing as the other states. Talk to your Yan facilitators. Make sure you're not doing the same type of pitch as another state. This is mainly for New South Wales, WA, Queensland, the online group, and Victoria. And to let you know that the Yan facilitators are there to help you. The Mayan staff won't be available online, but they have kindly offered themselves, and they've told me this 24/7. So if you do need them, feel free to give them a call or a message. And tonight you'll be having dinner. So yes, how amazing is that? And for the online group, I know we're all by ourselves in our homes, but don't worry, you will receive vouchers so you can or Uber Eats yourself some good food. And that is all from me today. Thank you again for this amazing day. And the last thing we'll do before we go off into our own little part is to do a checkout activity. Same thing we did this morning. If Martika, could you please post the link in the chat, and we'll go on that link and we'll just do one word again for how you're feeling right now.
Thanks.
So there's a lot of feedback then. And in the online group, could you please stay back as well as you'll continue working in the Zoom? I think we're having some issues with the link, but it is coming. Perfect. So if you could go on your phones again on www.menti.com, and again, use the same as we did this morning, use the code 31840162, and just write one word what you're describing this morning, this afternoon. I know some of the words we had this morning were intriguing, confused, we had excited, I think we had a few variety of words. So excited to see what we have now. Blessed, lit, love that word. Surely we get some fire emojis in there. I think it is a little bit laggy, but I can see there's a lot of words coming through. We already have 12 submissions. Great to see. whoa, it is getting hectic, insightful, amazing, excitement, educated, informed, enlightened, or powerful perspective. There's so many words I cannot keep up. Amazing. We're getting some emojis in there. Still a few nerves, and that is okay. It is okay to have a few nerves. Make sure you talk with some of the other participants and the other delegates and get to know them. And someone said KFC. Ooh, that would not be a bad show. Maybe some of the people online could order KFC from Uber. Sheesh is another one. Bad bee energy, love that. Sleepy, I know it's been a long day, a lot of information, but again, feel free to take a break if you need, and you will get some free time as well. But thank you again for so much for all of these words, and I think that is going to wrap up today's session. So you'll be working in your own state or territory groups, and I'm excited to see what you guys come up with tomorrow. So I think if there's nothing else from mine, I think you guys are free to go. The online group, could you just stay back just in case to work on your pitches?
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.